Chapter 3:15. A sharp dragon claw was imprinted on Hemder's face, and the other touched the tungsten rod that was deep in his chest. Keys pressed and twisted hard, and the wound on the demon lord's avatar instantly expanded several times. The entire chest was twisted into a pile of rotten flesh. The weapon that had been used to kill the camel god in the island world once again proved its power. After 2 consecutive hits, Hemder's half-human, half-worm body was only left with less than a quarter of its original size. Most of his body was not only blown into pieces but also turned into charred fat residue in the high temperature. There was no possibility of recovery by relying on the regenerative ability. In addition, the Grand Vader was obstructing him from the side, constantly counteracting his attempts to suppress the injury and heal himself. This demon lord's avatar had become an arrow at the end of its flight and was on the verge of collapse. However, the last straw that broke the camel's back was not the Grand Vader or the young blue dragon, but the Yazi beast that broke out of his body after devouring his flesh and blood. The bombardment of the Judgment Staff just now did not cause too much damage to this monster that was created from the remains of Leviathan. It shrank its body and desperately hid in Hemder's chest and abdomen area, thus escaping the disaster. "How are your injuries?" Using the psionic ability, Keys connected with his creation. The Yazi beast shook its body. "My situation is okay. The flesh and blood of demons are really nutritious." It stuck out its tongue and licked its lips. "At least it won't be a problem to fight another battle. Unfortunately, you may not have this opportunity for the time being." Hemder's body finally stopped moving like a melting candle. His body, along with his ambition of revenge on the young blue dragon, gradually collapsed and disintegrated. However, to be honest, the tyrant worm's avatar's body was indeed extraordinarily tough. It was even comparable to the real body of the camel god in the island world. This also caused the aftermath of the Judgment Staff explosion to be limited to the vicinity of the avatar's body and did not spread to cause more damage. "I will eventually return. Your lives are temporarily." Suddenly, a furious roar resounded between heaven and earth, and a huge worm-shaped phantom emerged from the seawater dyed dark green by Hemder's blood. At the same time, Hemder's body began to disintegrate even faster. His remaining flesh and blood rotted at a speed visible to the naked eye, and finally condensed into a ball of foam that emitted a shocking stench. Burning cloud technique. Worried that another accident would happen, the quick-witted Grand Vader immediately cast a spell to burn the remains of the Demon Lord's incarnation. The young blue dragon also added a breath of blazing dragon breath. The flames burned away the stinking foam left behind by Hemtar, but it could not stop an obscure wave from shooting out from it and into the counterclockwise vortex that slowly appeared on the surface of the sea. Hidden in Bite City, the few remaining shadow niches exploded at the same time. Before Hemtar was destroyed, he secretly extracted the power of chaos stored in them and combined it with the power of the tyrant worm to open a way for his soul to survive. That vortex is connected to the bottomless abyss. Keys discovered the problem, but it was too late to stop it. In a split second, an idea suddenly flashed in his mind. Maybe it's the Acid Fog Canyon bitwall. If there are enough demons, we can devour them together. The Yazi behemoth understood Hao Ren's intention. A cruel smile appeared on its ferocious dragon head. "As you wish, I can also get what I want. Why should I be afraid of failure?" As it spoke, the creature created by Keys first cast a grateful look at the young blue dragon. Then, without looking back, it turned into a stream of light and jumped into the gradually disappearing vortex. The mist that shrouded Bite City soon dissipated as the vortex on the surface of the sea disappeared. As the mist dissipated, the sickly eternal blazing sun was also revitalized. It slowly climbed in the sky and seemed to have expanded a little. The scouts of the Imperial Guard Regiment, who had been paying attention to the battle, quickly passed the news of victory to their commanders. Then, through the reports, they finally passed the news to Pharaoh, who had arrived at the front-line command post. "We won." King Metic stood in the middle of the command post and announced loudly to the generals who were loyal to him. Although he was still worried about the losses in Bite City, Esinder still smiled and tried to influence the people present. "It seems that we have to prepare for another celebration after Opat festival. Other food doesn't matter." The big-bellied general also heaved a sigh of relief. Knowing the king's heart, he joked, "I just hope that there is enough cherry liquor in His Majesty's cellar. I didn't drink enough last time." After a burst of laughter, the military orders were passed down in an orderly manner. There would be a celebration, but not now. At least, before the refugees who had retreated to the outside of the city were settled and the losses caused by the demon disaster were calculated, the Imperial Guard regiment would not be idle. They still needed to be vigilant and on high alert. After the arrival of the incarnation of the Demon Lord, although Bite City was not completely destroyed, the Lingang district, an important commercial district, was really devastated and collapsed. The dockworkers, merchants, and sailors who originally lived here became homeless. Many warehouses, along with the goods stored in them, were burned to the ground by the flames of war. The Grand Bazaar, which carried 2/3 of the city's trade, was now a ruin. In the process of moving the citizens back to Bite, all the residents of the Lingang district were temporarily gathered. They had to wait until the citizens of other districts were settled down before they could make unified arrangements. This work was extremely arduous. As the saying went, destruction is always easier than construction. When the order was rebuilt, the bureaucratic system of the whole city was challenged again. The Grand Vader and Keys, as the main contributors to driving away the incarnation of the Demon Lord from the Ashen World, could not immediately enjoy the flowers and applause. The Grand Vader of Medic cast a spell at the first moment, preparing to set up a super-large enchantment in the fjord to prevent anyone from being contaminated by the seawater contaminated by Hemtar and leaving behind any hidden dangers. The young Blue Dragon, on the other hand, ordered the Ogre brothers to lead the team to evacuate Bite to prevent other people from leaving an excuse. At the same time, he asked the half-lich Snade to work with him to study how to remove the components of the demon's flesh in the seawater. However, just as he was concentrating on preparing to cast a spell to examine the seawater, an obscure wave suddenly passed through several planes. The young Blue Dragon was instantly stunned. Chapter 316. Keys would never have dreamed that he would actually receive a gift from the bottomless abyss. And it was right after he killed the incarnation of a demon lord. But the truth was just that bizarre. And the reason was that he had a sudden inspiration to arrange the Yazi behemoth to enter the bottomless abyss. It was just that he did not expect that the feedback would come so quickly, and the feedback was actually the famous will of the abyss itself. The bottomless abyss was the home of the demons, but it was not ruled by the demons. Even those high and mighty demon lords only controlled the life and death of low-level demons. In fact, the bottomless abyss did not reject outsiders, including some evil existences such as fallen god. They could all build their own shelter there, and find their rightful place in the abyss. For those who took the initiative to enter the bottomless abyss and could contribute to its complex and inclusive ecological chain, the bottomless abyss was never stingy with its gift. And the Yazi behemoth, powerful, cold, tyrannical, bloodthirsty, and killing demons was the meaning of its existence. Its existence itself catered to the ecology of the bottomless abyss where only the fittest survived, so it easily received the favor of the will of the abyss. As the creator of the Yazi behemoth, the young Blue Dragon Keys also received a gift from the bottomless abyss. This was not a coincidence. In the long history of the abyss, there had been many beings who had contributed to the ecology of the abyss, and they had all enjoyed this privilege. The tyrant worm, who had created the acid mist worms, was one of them. In the bottomless abyss, they had the glory of the creator. As the species they created were burdened generation after generation, the population size gradually expanded, and this bonus brought them more and more benefits. And this benefit was the abyssal origin power, a great power that no one knew of but had existed since time immemorial. But Keys was not a demon. He was not even a creature of the chaos side. The abyss force, which was like the Emperor Molasses in the eyes of all demons, became a fatal hidden danger in the young blue dragon's body. It was not to say that the abyssal origin power was a deadly poison. It could indeed make Keys stronger, but it would also change him from the inside out. Not only his body shape and faction affiliation, but even his independent will and mode of thought would gradually be abyssed. If active adaptive ability was compared to a machine, then at this moment, in order to resist this life-threatening gift, Quest had no choice but to increase the power of the machine to the maximum and even overload it to resist the influence of the abyssal origin power on him. Reason told him that this was not a good time to deal with his own problems, but his body's instincts did not allow the young blue dragon to think too much. Snade, who was standing beside Keys and had been entrusted by him to study how to purify the seawater contaminated by Hemter's flesh, was the first to notice his abnormality. "Sir Keys, is there a problem?" The Demolic waved his hand to set up a protective barrier, which not only provided some protection for the two of them, but also could prevent others from probing. "Your face looks very pale now." Not only did he look pale, but under the influence of the abyssal origin power, the young blue dragon, who had turned into a human form, had turned red. The only thing that was worth rejoicing was that his eyes were still clear, and did not become crazy and violent because of the influence of the abyssal will. Divine power can't neutralize the abyssal origin power. After trying a few times, Keys no longer used the divine power. He plundered from the camel god to suppress himself. He found that it would only backfire. If my current body can't bear this power, then, suddenly, the young blue dragon had an epiphany. He no longer used his active adaptive ability to resist the abyssal origin power. He used his psionic ability to create his own spirit crystal servant with the ability he got from the Gith sage. Why could demons absorb the abyssal origin power smoothly and not have a rejection phenomenon like Keys's? Was it just because they were evil and the reason was so simple? The answer, of course, was no. Thanks to his knowledge inheritance that was far beyond his age, Keys knew that this problem was actually related to the life form of demons. For demons of the lower realm, the body was not only the carrier of the soul, but the body was the manifestation of the soul. In other words, the life form of soul and body as one was the basic condition for them to be able to absorb the abyssal origin power. Keys was not a demon of the lower realm, and naturally, he could not do this. Every time he absorbed the abyssal origin power, his soul and body would be further alienated, and this was also the reason why he felt pain. But the spirit crystal servant created by the psionic ability was different. This kind of creation that was materialized by psionic ability did not have a soul, and its existence itself was a combination of mind and will. From a certain point of view, the spirit crystal servant might be more suitable than the lower realm demons of the soul and body as one to be the carrier of the abyssal origin power. It was more suitable to carry the abyssal origin power that was transferred over. There had been mages who studied psionic abilities, and they believed that the spirit crystal servant was a special magical pet of psionic ability users. In fact, the relationship between the spirit crystal servant and the psionic ability user was closer than the relationship between the magical pet and the mage. The spirit crystal servant was more like a clone of the psionic ability user. Although in most cases, the spirit crystal servant was only used by its creator to store additional psionic ability for use in battle. Because all forces tended to move in the direction of least resistance, when Keys's spirit crystal servant was created, the abyssal origin power sensed it and happily gave up on occupying the young blue dragon's body, and turned to pour into the spirit crystal servant. With the continuous influx of the abyssal origin power, this originally colorless and transparent crystal was instantly dyed black, like a polyhedral black crystal shining with restrained brilliance, floating above Keys's head. With a flash of thought, the spirit crystal servant was taken back into the young blue dragon's body. Although it was soaked in the abyssal origin power, it would no longer affect Keys in the slightest. That is, Snade's voice was a little shaky. When the abyssal origin power poured into the spirit crystal servant, the legendary level Demolic keenly felt the vast power, and he already had some guesses. A sugar-coated bullet, Keys replied jokingly after letting out a sigh of relief. The sugar-coated bullet is eaten, and the bullet is also stored in the armory. Mr. Spell Consultant, you are really lucky. You followed the right boss and met a good employer who is diligent and thrifty. Snade was speechless. Chapter 317. Stacks of documents were piled up on Asinder's desk. A large number of reports, official documents, orders, and lists were piled up in a mess. The attendants were all busy, and no one had time to tidy them up. These were all related to the short but cruel war in Bite City, but Asinder's mind was not there. He held an unopened letter in his hand. The purple seal was branded with the silver emblem of the Obsidian Council. He tore open the seal and took out the neatly folded papyrus from the envelope. He recognized the neat handwriting on the letter at a glance. To the Great Pharaoh, the Obsidian Council contributed a great deal of magic support in this war. Through the spying eye, we witnessed the scene that decided the final outcome of the war. With the help of the Grand Vader, the Megalosaurus Pasha used the floating behemoths to launch a fatal blow at the powerful demon from a high altitude that was difficult to observe. From this, we came to the conclusion that the Megalosaurus Pasha controlled the air power that could decide the outcome of the war. Even if all the flying carpets were sent into the air, the black-robed mages of Medina might not be able to match it, and this is like a double-edged sword. In order not to be hurt by the blade, the Obsidian Council applied to establish their own airship fleet, or to buy some floating behemoths from the Megalosaurus Pasha to try to crack the technology and cultivate them. Although there were no words like burn after reading on the letter, the few pieces of papyrus still turned into fine sand in the pharaoh's hands, disappearing with the wind without leaving a trace. After reading the observation report, sent by the Obsidian Council, or rather Kunini himself, Asinder fell into deep thought. How could he not be amazed by the power of the Megalosaurus Pasha? According to the information he had collected, the actual age of the Megalosaurus was even younger than Asinder himself. First, it's the Grand Vexil, and now it's the Megalosaurus Pasha. The monarch of Medicus rubbed his forehead. The balance that had just been balanced suddenly has a few more variables. Where should we find new weights? At this time, an attendant trotted into the palace. He knelt on one knee and reported to the pharaoh, "Your Majesty, Zagan Pasha and Khalil Pasha have come together. They want to discuss the development of the archipelago with you." Someone gave me a pillow when I was dozing off. Isidore suddenly thought of something. Looks like my luck has always been good. Tell them to wait for me in the conference hall, Pharaoh said to the attendant. The monarch of Medic got up and walked out slowly. As he walked, he thought about how to turn the two Pasha into weights. It was not until he was stopped by another attendant when he passed through the side hall that Asinder sorted out his thoughts. "Your Majesty, you should wear it." The attendant was in charge of etiquette. He stopped Pharaoh and handed him a small roll of folded crimson wool vest. Asinder took it in his hand and saw the solemn emblem of the Lion of Naroya embroidered on it. It was a good habit of Asinder to follow good advice readily. He was very satisfied that the attendant who served him was so conscientious. "I will wear it. Good traditions must be strictly followed." With that, he put on the vest and walked to the magnificent conference hall at the north end of the palace. The room was very gorgeous and was specially designed for receiving guests. The dome was enchanted, and the sunlight shone into the hall. Under the clear sky, if one looked to the north, the horizon was as sharp as the edge of broken glass. Even some small islands near the coastline were clearly visible. Zagan and Khalil stood in the conference hall. Although there were seats in the hall, Pharaoh had not arrived yet, so the two Pasha naturally did not sit down first. After all, that would be rude. It was not until Pharaoh stepped into the hall and motioned for them to sit that they bowed and went to their seats. After they were seated, Esinder began to speak. You must remember last night. It was really a long night. I made an announcement in the Museum of the Great Vexer. Yes, we came for that. Looking at the two men who had been at each other's throats yesterday, but now sitting together, Esinder could not help but sigh in his heart. As expected, interest is the best glue in the world. He nodded and said, Very good. This matter really needs to be settled immediately. The two Pashas' faces were full of anticipation. The Wusan are unable to bear all the compensation. They plan to use the slaves from the Zhejiangjian talent market to make up the difference. At the fastest, the first batch of slaves will be transported to Medici in less than 2 weeks. Pharaoh paused for a moment. This was a technique. After throwing out the heart-wrenching words, he only needed a short pause to make the others more focused on what he was going to say next. In the entire Medici Empire, only the banishment order, issued by Bite City, can deprive a person of his freedom. But we are unable to count and issue so many orders for the slaves sent by the Wusan, so they can only stay on the islands of the archipelago and use hard labor to pay off the ransom for the atrocities of the Wusan War. When he heard the words archipelago territory, Zagan Pasha's face clearly showed a hint of joy. But Khalil Pasha, who only owned a few coastal cities, inadvertently frowned. Your Majesty, I have no intention to oppose your arrangement. I also admit that the sailors of the archipelago territory are very good, Khalil carefully worded his words. But you must also know that the number of slaves is huge. Without elite soldiers to suppress them with swords, just whipping them will not be enough to make them obedient. At the same time, it is difficult to guarantee that they will not cause any trouble in the archipelago territory. Hearing Khalil's words, Zagan wanted to refute, but after thinking about it, he realized that this was indeed the case. The interests involved in this were too huge. If it was not handled well and caused trouble, the entire archipelago territory would have to take the blame for this batch of slaves. I think Khalil Pasha's worries are not unreasonable. Zagan turned his head and nodded to Khalil to express his goodwill. He then said, The sailors of the archipelago territory are indeed capable of fighting against 10, but in the face of such a large scale of slave management, we are indeed a little short of manpower. And among the slaves, there may be spies planted by the Japanese, so we have to be careful. Pharaoh took in the expressions of the two and replied, This is also one of my concerns. Esinder showed a playful smile and continued, however, I am more concerned about the benefits created by this batch of slaves. How can we operate it to benefit the Medici Empire more? Esinder's words were like a bolt from the blue, striking the hearts of the two Pasha. Only then did they realize that what the two had said before seemed to be related to themselves and did not consider the real owners of this batch of slaves. For a moment, the two Pasha were drenched in cold sweat. Esinder pulled his wool vest with satisfaction and straightened it. Chapter 3:18. After scolding the two Pasha, Esinder went straight to the point. Of course, I don't want to go back on my words, the Pharaoh of the Medici Empire said seriously. The promise I made to you last night is definitely valid, but you have to understand that the interests of the Medici Empire are above everything else, including me. Of course, Your Majesty is indeed far-sighted. The two Pasha expressed their agreement with Pharaoh's words. Then, Esinder waved his hand, and an attendant came in from outside the hall and presented a stack of papyrus. The devil's calamity lasted from last night to this morning. You too can be said to have experienced it personally. Why don't you guess the losses of Bite City? Just as Zagan was about to answer, he inadvertently saw Khalil gently shake his head. He immediately realized that a silence was better than 100 words. According to statistics, the reconstruction of Bite City's Lingang district will cost at least 3 million silver cat. Seeing that the two Pasha were silent, Esinder sneered and continued, "Of course, you don't have to worry. This money won't be distributed to you. But the reconstruction of Lingang district is not only about the repair of buildings and the construction of ships, but also the reopening of new trade routes and injecting more vitality into it." This time, Zagan didn't look at Khalil's face. He said first, "Your Majesty, although the archipelago territory is remote and barren, I can guarantee that all merchant ships with sailors serving in the archipelago territory will have the priority to sail to Bite City in the future." Quite sensible, Esinder thought to himself, but then he said, "It's just that we don't have enough ships. Bite City already has air routes connecting it to other inland cities. I hope that the air routes to the archipelago territory can also be opened." Seeing that the two Pasha in front of him had a confused expression, Esinder explained patiently, "It takes 2 days to transport goods from the archipelago territory to Bite City by sea. But with the flying speed of the floating behemoth, it can complete the round trip in 1 day. When the Japanese slaves are put into the plantations and mines, a series of products such as sugar, spices, and ores will increase. With the floating behemoths as the transportation vehicle, these goods can be transported to Bite City faster, which will provide more help for the development of trade in the Lingang district." But, this time, it was Harry who spoke. The old Pasha hesitated for a moment. "This matter requires the support of the Megalosaurus Pasha. If we want to increase the transport capacity, we may not only need to set up additional routes, but we may also need to purchase adult floating behemoths from them." "This is my test for you," Pharaoh interrupted Khalil. "After this battle, Bite City's finances will be tight in the short term. You have to submit your demands to His Excellency Keys and negotiate the purchase order. This would also affect the two Pasha's authority over the Japanese slaves in the future. Between the two of you, the one who signs a contract with the Megalosaurus Pasha will have more say in dealing with the Japanese slaves." Esinder did not mince his words as he threw out his demands. His purpose was very clear. Zagan and Khalil, no matter who wanted to have the power to distribute the Japanese slaves, had to bear the cost of purchasing the floating behemoths from the young blue dragon. Medic or Pharaoh, who was in Baxter, would not pay even a copper coin for this project. "My lords, I have something to say." Seeing the two Pasha fall into deep thought at the same time, they must know that the purchase of the behemoth was not cheap, and might even require the family behind it to use up all their assets. Esinder said seriously, "Before you think about what Medic will do for you, you must first understand what you have done for Medic. Only those who are willing to bear the trials and hardships with the Empire, and who have a long-term vision, can be shadowed by the Empire for generations." The two Pasha hurriedly recited and ended the meeting. Under the guidance of the attendants, they walked out of the Pharaoh's palace. "His Majesty wants to roast us on a fire this time." Glancing at the attendants who were gradually disappearing behind him, Zagan could not help but whisper to Khalil on the short cobblestone road that led to their carriage, "The purchase of the floating behemoth is definitely not a small sum of money." Khalil glanced at the Pasha of the archipelago, but he immediately realized that his bad habit might cause the other party to be dissatisfied. "Pasha Zagan, please be careful with your words." He looked around. "If we are divided, we will both suffer, but if we are united, we will both benefit. How can we let only one family bear the investment risk for the cooperation between the two families?" "You mean," the two Pasha's whispers soon reached Pharaoh's ears. They did not know that a few generations ago, Pharaoh had ordered people to bury brass tubes under the cobblestone road, which were specially used to listen to the minister's discussions. They were discussing the purchase of the floating behemoths from Keys together. This was not beyond Esiender's expectations, But he also knew that neither of the two Pasha would agree to hand over the table knife that was used to divide the big cake of Japanese slaves to the other. Originally, they were willing to cooperate mainly because they believed that Pharaoh, who held the table knife, would not be biased towards either side. But today, when Essinder made it clear that the table knife would be handed over to one of them because of the reconstruction work of Bite City, competition was inevitable, and this would set the stage for future conflicts and even conflicts to erupt. At that time, Pharaoh could use this as an opportunity to mediate and recover the benefits generated by the Japanese slave labor, as well as the air route that was equipped with the floating behemoth. At the current stage, although the two Pasha said that they were cooperating to purchase the floating behemoths from Keys on the surface, they would definitely seek the opportunity to buy them alone in private, and the behavior of raising the price would be inevitable. The two Pashas' offer was 2 weights, which would make the Megalosaurus Pasha unable to attend to other matters in the near future, and the balance of power in the Medici Empire would temporarily return to balance. I just don't know. Essinder sat in the empty conference hall, thinking alone, these 2 weights are just bait. I don't know how long this delicate balance will last. Outside the conference hall, footsteps could be heard. Because there was a marble floor outside the door and a small corridor, the sound of footsteps could be heard very far. Your Majesty, an attendant ran in and reported to Essinder, Speaker Kunini is waiting outside for your summons. Pharaoh ordered to let him in. In the pursuit of balance, he had thought of a plan, but he needed someone to carry it out. Chapter 319. Pharaoh Essinder requests an audience with you immediately. Kunini paced back and forth in front of the copper-clad oak door that led to the conference hall, repeating this sentence in his mind. He licked his chapped lips and wiped his reagent-stained fingers on his black robe. When Pharaoh's attendant delivered the message to the president of the Obsidian Council, he was still busy experimenting with the flesh of the Demon Lord's incarnation. He wished he had time to change into a decent robe. As a demon count, Kunini knew the importance of a good personal image. Unfortunately, he could not make Pharaoh wait. The attendant ran out. Lord Kunini. The young man had a maturity that did not match his age. Pharaoh invites you in. The door squeaked when it was pushed open by the attendant. Kunini adjusted the robe on his body, and after making sure that it was at least flat, he stepped inside. He had met Pharaoh many times before, but he had never been to this conference hall. In fact, very few people had been here before. Generally speaking, only the Grand Vader and the various Pasha had the right to be here. The ceiling of the conference hall had been enchanted with magic, allowing the light of the eternal blaze to pour down, but it did not make people feel hot. The sunlight shone on the exquisite tapestries hanging on the walls, making the historical events of Medica appear vivid and lifelike. Essinder sat upright behind an oak table. The table was made of the best oak, taken from a certain pharaoh's flagship that had been destroyed in a naval battle. Broken quills and scrolls were scattered on the table. These were the declarations of war that had been instigated by hopes, threats, and lies. They recorded one battle after another without smoke. Kunini. Pharaoh's greeting brought the demon count's thoughts back. I've read your observation report. I see, Kunini thought to himself. At the same time, he instantly calmed down, because things had returned to what he knew. The demons had many good plans. You should know that the reason why the Obsidian Council exists is actually because of my support. It is for the balance of power in the Medici Empire, and not to protect those vermin of Bite's nobles. Your frankness is a bit surprising, but you've said these words to me before, and I deeply agree with you. Kunini's face showed a smile that was just right. It looked like he had wisdom in his hands, not flattery. Just now, in this conference hall, I carried out an extortion against the two Pasha. Extortion is a gamble, a tool used by desperate people. Kunini's smile widened, as if he was about to laugh. You only do things that you're sure of. I guess, for the sake of the Medici Empire, of course, you made them understand their obligations. Obligations? Ha, you're right. It was Essidor who laughed first, causing a few drops of ink to drip from the quill in his hand. Pharaoh grabbed a pinch of chalk powder and covered the papyrus scroll, carefully removing the ink stains. But the balance of power is still not balanced. After removing the ink stains, Essidor raised his head, his eyes as cold as a dagger that could pierce a person's heart. And you promised that the Obsidian Council would provide enough weight for me to use. Of course. Faced with Monarch Medrich's gaze, the demon count disguised as a mortal chose to endure for the time being. He lowered his head. I haven't forgotten the promise I made. And the results? Pharaoh interrupted Kunini and continued to press. The noble mage group of the Obsidian Council? The airship that was proven to be inferior to the floating behemoth created by the Megalosaurus Pasha? Soul Energy Collector. The cold language came out of Kunini's mouth. Hearing the word clearly, Pharaoh's pupils even dilated a little. Kunini was very satisfied with this. His Excellency the Grand Vexer, or the previous generations of Allans, their strength has never been questioned. Even if their successors were mediocre, as long as they received this title, they would become the best spellcaster in Medrich. What are you trying to say? Facing the Pharaoh's questioning, the demon count was not surprised at all. Your Majesty, have you never thought about why? Or is it because of the traditions since ancient times that you have lost interest in questioning? When it came to manipulating people's minds, if the Batsu people claimed to be second, no one would dare to claim to be first. He continued, the reason why the Grand Vexer is powerful is that they have mastered a unique spellcasting method. It's different from Medrich, and even different from the one used by all spellcasters in the Ash world. In order to increase his persuasiveness, Kunini took out an obsidian magic bead from his robe. While all of us are still shabbily using this scattered life energy to consume for spellcasting, the Grand Vexer almost exclusively enjoyed the more powerful soul energy. Even if Pharaoh was not a mage, he still understood Kunini's words. In fact, Asinder knew even more than Kunini. As the current ruler of the Medici Empire, he knew of the highest-level spell contract between his ancestor and the first Allan. The ancient soul-binding mage Shurik swore loyalty to the Asinder family as the price to obtain the support of the Medici Empire. Like those high and mighty gods, he could manage the souls of dead mortals and absorb part of their power for his own use. In the thousands of years that followed, the successive generations of Grand Vexer used their own practical actions to prove their loyalty to the Asinder family. No matter how muddle-headed Pharaoh was at that time, they would do their best to assist him. For thousands of years, the mortals had died generation after generation, and the souls they left behind had been properly managed, so there had not been any disasters. That was why the entire Ash world had not slowly become a country where humans and ghosts lived together after being cursed by the god. However, the power of the Grand Vexer did not belong to Pharaoh. Although he could not openly take it away due to tradition, his covetous desire for it had never disappeared. At this moment, Kunini's words were tantamount to directly hitting Asinder's heart. He could not help but want to know more. Your soul energy collector has been completed? Very soon, Your Majesty, please rest assured, Kunini replied with a bow. When the Devil Calamity broke out, I happened to obtain a magical item called the Shadow Niche. It was arranged in Bite City in advance by the incarnation of the demon lord to store the power of chaos, and it gave me a lot of inspiration. Not long after, the slaves who will be made into obsidian magic beads will not only have their life force, but also the power in their souls will not be wasted. And with the mixed energy collector, you will obtain the same powerful power as the Grand Vexer. Be careful. Don't make any mistakes. Eshin crossed his arms on the table and thought for a moment. He still could not resist the temptation. Don't do it again. This is the only time. Let's challenge tradition. Kunini smiled again. This is the last time. Chapter 320. What are you trying to say? Santos asked with a frown. What do you mean when the sand rhino has diarrhea, it makes a lot of noise? The subject of the fat merchant's inquiry was a helper of the Dragonborn clan who was responsible for taking care of the sand rhinos at the Bite terminal. He was walking side by side with Santos's carriage on the road to the city. Since you left, there are 2 sand rhinos that can't poop out. Can't poop out what? The desert kobold waved his hand back and forth in front of his nose as if he smelled something foul. I don't want to take care of it after it poops out the feces that it has been holding for 3 days. That's great, Santos could not help but exclaim. The merchant, who had traveled all the way to Bite at night, covered his forehead. The last thing he wanted to do today was to take care of a constipated sand rhino. You can add some olive oil to its feed. It should be able to clear its intestines. I fed it 3 days ago, but it still didn't work. Santos couldn't believe it. I've been feeding it olive oil for 3 days, but there's no reaction at all? He couldn't help but shudder as if he had thought of some unbearable memory. After walking for less than half an hourglass, Santos took the initiative to break the silence. It's indeed Bite, he said with emotion. It's only been 5 days since the devil's disaster, and the city has gradually returned to normal. Rows upon rows of towers spread out under the high walls, and it was a magnificent sight. Large roofs overhung the cobblestone streets, and there were shops, factories, and chimneys belching out smoke. Many peddlers, after paying the entrance tax, entered the city with their wares, or their purses, and left with their gains. Santos believed that he would also gain more wealth in the reconstruction of the Bite-Limport district. Of course, making money for himself should come after completing the task entrusted to him by the scale of perpetual order. After all, it was a matter of business ethics and personal reputation. They could not afford to be careless. We're here. The desert kobold who was leading the way for the fat merchant reminded him. Then, he whistled, and several shadowy guards of the Dragonborn clan who were hidden nearby quickly left. The great Megalosaurus Pasha, His Excellency Keys, Lord of the Dragon Lair, and his spell consultant are staying in this apartment for the time being. You can go in and visit. If you have time, please come down to the beast pen in the terminal and help treat that poor sand rhino. Santos was speechless. When the other party turned around and left, Santos let out a long sigh of relief. He was really afraid that the desert kobold would drag him away to face a sand rhinoceros with some discomfort in its stomach. He had come to Bite mainly to escort a batch of urgently needed equipment and raw materials. However, due to the large amount of cargo and the necessary manpower for the voyage, the floating behemoth was about to be overloaded. Therefore, Santos had no choice but to set out in advance and travel by land instead of taking the Leviathan's derivative to Bite City overnight. That batch of cargo was mainly some crystallized powdered salt shipped from Taka. Through many experiments, the half-lich Snade used many methods to try to purify the seawater polluted by Hemtar and the demon worms it released. Finally, he found an alchemy reagent that had excellent effects, and the material required a large amount of Taka powdered salt. After some inspection, Santos walked through the door of the apartment. In the hall with a shiny marble floor, he saw the young blue dragon in human form and the half-lich Snade, the spell consultant. They stood next to a device that looked like a pump, constantly checking the situation on the dashboard everywhere. 2 large water troughs were dug out side by side in the hall. The machine was constantly pumping water from one of the troughs and then discharging it into the other trough. Seeing Santos coming in, Keys waved to him in greeting. "Good day, Mr. Santos." The fat merchant hurriedly returned the greeting. "How's the purchase of the powdered salt in Taka City? Have you brought back the samples?" Santos hurriedly stepped forward and handed over a small package that he carried with him, in which there were many crystallized powdered salt fragments. As you know, the scale of perpetual order has emptied the powdered salt storage in Taka City. Just before I arrived here, the first batch of cargo should have been delivered to Bite by the floating behemoth. It will take 3 more flights to transport all the cargo here." The young blue dragon nodded. He first took the pink lake salt brought by Santos and poured it into a preset feeding port on the pump. Then, he turned to the fat merchant and said, "This machine is called purifying water pump." He pointed to the machine in front of him that was made of metal, wood, and some kind of plant extract. It will be the flagship product of the scale of perpetual order in Bite City in the future. Santos was used to Keys using some strange words from time to time. Although he did not know much about the relationship between goods and fists, he roughly understood that fists were hot goods. And this purifying water pump, Keys continued when he saw Santos showing an interested look, "We'll give it all away for free." What? Because Santos was concentrating on observing the purifying water pump, he did not pay attention at first. But he immediately reacted. "Your fist's product, do you mean it's free? If it's all free, how high is the cost of this machine?" Hearing Santos's question, the young blue dragon answered seriously, "After estimation, the cost of making a set of purifying water pump is about 280 silver cats. Excluding the engineering model used to purify the fjord's seawater, the cost of the ordinary model is about 50 silver cats, or even less." 50 silver cats. Hearing this cost, Santos, who was very talented in business, immediately realized that this purifying water pump, even if it was an ordinary model, was not affordable for ordinary families. Only those wealthy merchants or the nobles of Beitar would be willing to fork out so much wealth in one go. However, the number of these people was limited after all. If the profit was increased on the basis of the cost, then the number of people who would buy the purifying water pump in the end might be less. Thinking of what Keys had told him before, "Be sure to try your best to empty the stock of Pink Lake salt in Taka City," Santos immediately understood that the Megalosaurus Pasha wanted to make profits from the consumables business. In fact, this was not the first time the scale of perpetual order did this. After the Japanese invasion, the fanatic armor that saved Gnome City, in addition to the sales of the product itself, the Chamber of Commerce also made a lot of money from the nutrient solution used to expel acid and recharge the muscle implants. As expected of a blue dragon, Santos could not help but secretly exclaim. Chapter 321. With the end of the Devil disaster, Bite, the capital of Medici, gradually returned to normal. Most of the citizens had returned to their previous life. Only the sailors and dock workers in the Lingang district could only live in temporary shacks due to the severe damage to their houses. Fortunately, the climate in Bite was mild. The hottest period of the year was around Opat Festival, so they didn't have to worry about the cold. So far, the biggest challenge facing the city was the food supply. As a port city, Bite's food was basically imported. During this season, because the food in the southern grain-producing area of Medici was not ripe, Bite could only get food from the overseas colonies. Many overseas enclaves of the Medici Empire, including the archipelago territory, would send a large number of grain ships to Bite at this time of the year. For the merchants in those places it was a fixed income every year, so no one would give it up easily. However, the fjords of Bite City had been blocked, and would not be opened until the contamination of the devil's flesh and blood was removed. Outside the fjords, Pharaoh had sent the Imperial Guard Corps to forcibly occupy some smuggling docks and expand them. However, most of the docks were located near the beach. Except for some small sampans, ships with a deep draft couldn't dock at all. Those grain ships from overseas could only rely on small sampans to slowly unload the grain onto the shore. Not only was the transportation efficiency low, but the heavy rain could fall at any time during this period, so the grain that couldn't be unloaded was at risk of getting wet. At the same time, due to the prosperous trade before, most of the citizens in Bite City didn't have the habit of storing grain. The decrease in the import of grain made the price of grain in the city rise steadily, and the citizens complained incessantly. Naturally, the ruler of Bite City was also very anxious. Megalosaurus Pasha, after a report, an attendant of Pharaoh hurried into Key's residence. When he entered the door, he saw a guest in a brown robe standing in the hall. Commander Wenfeng is also here. Sir, Pharaoh sent me to ask if you need any help with supplies. We thank you for your kindness, Your Majesty. I have just demonstrated the highest level of purification effect of the purifying water pump model to the special envoy of the Grand Vexil, Keyes said as he picked up a glass of clear water and handed it to the attendant. The purified water can even be drunk directly. Out of loyalty to Pharaoh and respect for the Pasha in front of him, the attendant took the cup and sipped his saliva carefully. Although the water in the cup had been purified, it still had a salty taste, but it was not impossible to swallow. This is definitely the most disgusting drink I have ever tasted, the attendant carefully evaluated. But polluted seawater can even be drunk after purification, and it won't cause too much harm to health, just as the Megalosaurus Pasha said. Before deciding to purify the polluted seawater, the officials and nobles in Bite City had held an extensive discussion. Among them, some suggested that instead of wasting time and effort to purify the seawater, it would be better to let the Grand Vexil dispel the ice wall barrier and rely on the natural purification ability of the sea to pour a large amount of seawater into the fjord to replace the polluted seawater. However, the Megalosaurus Pasha's experiment on the spot made everyone dispel this idea. He collected a tank of seawater contaminated by Helmuthal's flesh and blood and put some sea creatures in it on the spot. They immediately became demonized. The black-robed mages present dissected the demonized sea creatures and found that their bodily fluids were still polluting. In other words, if the polluted seawater was allowed to flow out of the fjord, it was very likely that the pollution would spread to the entire sea. Every sea area and every country would be surrounded by countless demonized creatures. Just imagining it was enough to make one's scalp tingle. Therefore, all the authorities in Bite City voted collectively and passed the resolution to do their best to purify the seawater contaminated by the demon's flesh and blood. Pharaoh personally ordered all the spellcasters in Medic to collect the purification plan and offered a reward of 100,000 silver cats as a reward. Needless to say, with Snader, a legendary mage who had studied demon worms for more than 300 years, the scale of perpetual order easily obtained this high reward with the help of the purifying water pump. At present, all the citizens of Bite City, including the ordinary citizens, were concerned about when the purifying water pump would be put into use every day. Your Excellency Pasha, I have to admit that the purifying water pump of your Chamber of Commerce is indeed very effective, the attendant first affirmed and then continued to add, but the seawater in the fjord doesn't seem to need such a thorough purification. Quest knew what he wanted to say. You're right. To purify it to the drinking stage, after the purification pump cleans up the seawater contaminated by the demon's flesh, it still needs desalination, distillation, and other processes. This will indeed affect the efficiency of its fundamental function. Then, of course, we're not going to use this product to purify the seawater in the fjord, the young blue dragon explained patiently. After all, although the attendant's position was not high, he represented Pharaoh. In fact, 20 purifying water pumps have been assembled today and will be put into use soon. Then he told the attendant about the ideas of being vigilant in times of peace, taking precautions, and being careful is the parent of safety. Under the influence of anxiety, the attendant took away a purifying water pump with a more advanced function and presented it to Pharaoh. You want to promote this product in Bite City? Commander Wenfeng, who had been watching Keyes' marketing, also got up and said goodbye after Pharaoh's attendant left. Before leaving, he joked with a smile, "Can I buy one?" Of course, the young blue dragon, who had transformed into a human form, turned his head and showed a harmless smile. "But you don't need to buy it. I'll give the first batch of purifying water pumps to every family who is willing and can afford the purifying materials free of charge." Although he was quick-witted, he was not a gifted businessman like Santos. Commander Wunfeng was confused by Keyes' words and left his residence with doubts. After dealing with the visitors, Keyes tidied up his clothes, used the advanced teleportation spell, and calmly came to the busy dock construction site. The fat merchant Santos and the half-lich Snade had been waiting for him for a long time. Chapter 322. On the dock's anchorage, a precise water clock timer was placed, and it was somewhat out of place with the surrounding ruins. The water droplets fell, and the elapsed time was recorded. Finally, it reached the preset moment, and a sizzling sound was heard. "Turn on the switch, Ignite." As the representative of the scale of perpetual order, the fat merchant Santos stood on the platform and announced loudly. Following his order, the workers who had been prepared for a long time got busy in an instant. These people were all employees of the Chamber of Commerce, and they had all gone through layers of screening. Other than having a clean background, they were all hard-working and capable. According to the requirements of the operation manual, under the instructions of the supervisors, the workers first closed the gate as the exhaust device, then sent the coal into the combustion furnace. Finally, when the instrument panel showing the negative pressure reached the specified scale, they placed the water pump in the seawater. The sound of the polluted seawater being pumped quickly turned from the initial gurgling to rumbling. All the seawater would flow through a special purification cauldron, and through the reaction with the purification potion made with the pink lake salt crystal as the main material, the residual toxins of the demon's flesh and blood would be cleansed before being discharged. Through several pipelines laid in advance, the discharged seawater would be sent to the ocean outside the fjord. At the mouth of the fjord, there were also several water pumps installed on the towering ice wall, and at the same time, the seawater outside the fjord would be pumped in. According to previous calculations, as long as more than 100 purification water pumps could work smoothly every day, then it would only take about 5 days for the seawater in the fjord to be completely purified. The residual flesh and blood of the demon lord's incarnation would be so low that it could no longer affect other marine life, and the crisis would be resolved. When the engineering team of the scale of perpetual order was busy, many citizens rushed to the periphery of the cordon, wanting to see how the new purification water pump worked. As more and more people gathered, and even the imperial guards were alarmed, the big-bellied general sent some people to follow him to be responsible for maintaining order near the dock construction site. Sir Pasha, the Medici military noble, whose figure was somewhat similar to Santos, approached Keyes, pointed at the rumbling purification water pump in front of him and asked, "Can the water pump only be used once? It's a pity to leave it unused after using it." Keyes smiled. "Of course, these pumps can't only be used once. After removing the parts dedicated to purifying the demon pollution, they can be reused." After saying that, he raised his head and signaled a group of people walking over from outside the cordon. He smiled and said, "The people who will buy these equipment are here." Wearing a light green robe, Halil Pasha walked over surrounded by a group of personal guards and greeted Keyes from afar. "Good day, Megalosaurus Pasha." The powerful Medici minister, who ruled several coastal cities, greeted the young blue dragon with a nod that was famous under his rule. "These purifying pumps are really great inventions." As early as 2 days ago, after receiving Pharaoh's advice together with Zagan of the archipelago, Halil took the initiative to contact Keyes. When Quess heard that Khalil wanted to order a behemoth as a transportation vehicle, he gave him a definite answer. However, the price he quoted later still exceeded Khalil's expectations, so further communication was needed. However, the young blue dragon immediately recommended the purifying water pump that he and Snade had jointly invented. He also pointed out that, This tool can solve the problem of water accumulation in the mine and greatly increase the efficiency of the Wusong slave miners. Moreover, compared to the astronomical purchase cost of the Leviathan derivative, the price of these purifying water pumps was extremely cheap. It was not even a fraction of the former. Today, when the purifying water pumps started working, Halil sent a letter in advance to tell Keys that he would personally come to congratulate him. However, the young Blue Dragon knew very well that this Pasha actually wanted to come and see the actual effect of the water pumps when they were operating. "Thank you for your kind words. Everything is going well." After saying a set of pleasantries, Keys brought the Pasha and the equally curious Big Belly General to take a closer look at the purifying water pump. He also used professional words such as numbers and comparisons to brag about his business. After this water pump system is in operation, the only labor required is the filling of the fuel. As long as there is enough coal and water, the purifying water pump can continue to work. What if the depth of the mine is too deep? How deep can this pump draw water from the mine? Obviously, after thinking about purchasing, this Pasha must have done his homework. Faced with the doubts of the consumers, as a professional who was admired by Yugros in Shanghai, he seemed to be very talented in the art of speech, due to the complaints of the Blue Dragon race. He calmly explained, "That's right." He explained calmly, "The structure of the mine is basically excavated in the form of multiple platforms. Every time it reaches a certain depth, it will open up a platform. In the mine, due to the seepage of underground water, most of the platforms at the bottom will have a certain amount of water." After throwing out the information increment, Keys instantly focused the attention of the two people on him. He continued, "And this water is currently drawn to the surface bit by bit manually. When the mine is dug a little deeper, the seepage of underground water is faster than the discharge of the water. This mine will be abandoned because it is impossible to mine and there is also the danger of a landslide. But if there is this kind of water pump, although it can currently only draw water up to a depth of 20 yards, every platform in the mine can be built with a water tank, and one or even more drainage pumps can be installed to draw out the water in different levels. In this way, the mine can be dug deeper." Under Keys' encouraging gaze, Khalil Pasha, who had already understood the working principle of the graded mine drainage system, said excitedly, "More slave miners can be placed and more mineral deposits can be dug. Did you see that?" "What do you mean by smart person?" the young Blue Dragon said exaggeratedly, as if he was talking to the Big Belly General, but in fact, he was flattering Pasha Khalil. "Just a little bit and you understand. No need to explain more. Of course. After all, the two of you are the Pasha who are in charge of the Pharaoh's territory." The pot-bellied general agreed readily. After talking for a while, because of some of the second-hand parts, Keys generously gave the order of the mine pump a 20% discount. As the conversation went on, he even had the intention to give more discount. This almost made Santos, who had just come over, horrified. The senior manager of the scales of the Eternal Order couldn't help but say, "Sir, we can't give any more discounts. If we give any more discounts, we will lose money." Chapter 323. The price of gold was falling again. Holding a stack of the latest summary reports, Commander Wenfeng walked into the study of the Grand Vader. This room was located in the west wing of the Great Library. The shelves on the four walls were filled with all kinds of books and scrolls, causing the small living space in the middle to have a musty smell. It smelled like a mausoleum that had been sealed for centuries. This room should really have one or two windows, Commander Wenfeng thought to himself. But he knew very well that this suggestion would go against the tradition of the Allans, and the Grand Vader would not accept it. Apart from that, the layout of the study was actually quite good. There was very little furniture in the room, and it was all very simple. The wooden chair was beautifully carved, but the texture was hard and it was not very comfortable to sit on. There was a low table in the center. There were no decorations on it, and the smooth black surface only reflected the light of the fluorite chandelier. Everything was in good order. Even the firewood by the fireplace. A period after Opat festival happened to be the time when the rain was the heaviest in Medic. In order to prevent the books and scrolls from getting wet, they still needed to be heated from time to time. Everything was neat and tidy. Respected Grand Vader. As soon as Commander Wenfeng pushed open the door and entered the study, he heard someone talking to Grand Vader. He pursed his lips and revealed a faint smile. "I've collected the report you wanted. Perhaps you'd like to hear my report first." Zagan, who was in the middle of a conversation with the Grand Vader, had a slightly displeased expression on his face when he heard someone interrupt him. But when he turned around and saw who it was, the Pasha's face immediately showed a bright smile. "Oh, that's natural." He narrowed his eyes. "So it's Commander. You must have something important to discuss with the Grand Vader. You don't need to avoid it. This matter also has something to do with you. It's not an exaggeration to say that it belongs to you." The Grand Vader's words stunned Zagan, and then he was secretly delighted. He did not expect that he, a Pasha who had always been excluded from the center of Medica's power, would have the opportunity to be entrusted with such an important task by the Prime Minister of the Empire. "As long as you command, I will do it." Zagan immediately expressed his attitude. He quietly glanced at Commander Wenfeng, wanting to see the expression of this trusted aide of the Grand Vicehouse, whether there would be any changes because of this, but the result was disappointing. Commander Wenfeng didn't move, feel uneasy, or stare at the hydraulic timer in the corner. He just stood there with his back straight, next to a wooden chair that was uncomfortable to sit on. With clear, bright eyes, he looked at the Grand Vader in the middle of the study, as if everything was as it should be. "This is a statistical report on the trend of gold prices in the past month." The Great Vader didn't seem to make any movements, but the stack of papyrus in Commander Wenfeng's arms fluttered like butterflies, circling around Zagan Pasha's body and surrounding him. The ruler of the archipelago was surprised. He wanted to touch the papyrus that was drawn with lines and marked with numbers and symbols that were difficult to understand at the moment, but the papyrus avoided his fingers like real butterflies. "Just take a look. The papyrus is easily damaged, and this statistical result is not easy to come by, so it will have to be archived later." Of course. Zagan replied embarrassedly. He no longer raised his hand, but lowered his head closer to the papyrus. After looking at it for a long time, he showed a blank face. 100 years ago, the gold in the Ash world was almost completely excavated. Over the past 100 years, as this precious metal has become more and more scarce, its price has become more and more expensive. But why has the price of gold been falling recently? Did someone discover a new mine, or did someone dig out a large amount of ancient gold from underground and sell it? He had to admit that the Archipelago Pasha's analytical ability was quite meticulous. It was just that he hadn't had any contact with the scale of perpetual order before, so he didn't have the opportunity to obtain the gold currency used by the Chamber of Commerce for settlement. Of course, the Grand Wetzel didn't want to test his ability to guess, so he straightforwardly told him the answer. "It's the Megalosaurus Pasha's the scale of perpetual order," he explained. "In the past, when purchasing goods, that Chamber of Commerce usually used their own suppressed gold currency for settlement. The source of the gold may be the treasures left in the Blue Dragon's lair, although this possibility is not great, or it may be that they found a new gold mine, or dug out ancient treasures from underground." Then, Zagan hesitated. He knew very well that no matter who it was, having such a large amount of gold, or just possibly having a large amount of gold, that person's personal safety would be threatened. Even for a Megalosaurus, there was no exception. But what did this have to do with him? Did the Grand Wetzel summon him this time to plot against the Megalosaurus Pasha? "You may have misunderstood me." Zagan chose his words carefully, trying not to appear hypocritical. The archipelago is a very barren land, and there have never been any powerful warriors or spellcasters there. As long as you command, I'll do it. The Grand Wetzel used Zagan's words to tease him, but that was all. Zagan Pasha, your imagination is a bit too rich. The purpose of my call for you is that when you purchase goods from the Megalosaurus Pasha to solve the problem caused by the Wusong slaves, you can also borrow some gold from him. It's better to have a good reason. Zagan was surprised. Loan? Gold. The Grand Wetzel nodded. Recently, only you and Khalil Pasha have gone to contact the Megalosaurus Pasha, so it won't seem strange. I'll pay you the principal of the gold loan according to the current real-time gold price on the statistical document. About 500,000 ingots should be enough. As for the interest, the Grand Wetzel added, after the Wusong slaves are delivered, I'll do my best to fight for the management rights for you. Only when the Grand Wetzel made this promise did Zagan Pasha's tightly knitted brows relax. The two continued to talk about some topics, but most of them revolved around the problem of how to deal with keys. When Zagan left the Grand Wetzel's study, he involuntarily glanced at Commander Wenfeng, who had been standing there like a wooden sculpture. He saw that Commander Wenfeng was still standing in the same place, not moving even half a step. What a strange person. Zagan muttered in a low voice and then left. Greed makes people blind. Are you reminding me? Of course not. Chapter 324. The sun finally hid behind the distant mountains, and the sky was dyed a jewel-like purple by the afterglow of the setting sun. The servants quietly walked in and lit the fire in the Grand Vexor's study. The flame just burned quietly, as if it had learned to keep quiet under the training of a powerful spellcaster. Commander Wenfeng sat back in the uncomfortable chair and crossed his hands on his knees again. He maintained his usual calmness on the outside, but his heart was in turmoil. Only the light in his eyes revealed this secret. He was born in a noble family in Bite, which was noble and rich and had a history almost as long as the city itself. In his early life, Commander Wenfeng had enjoyed all the luxuries that wealth and status could bring him. He was smart and had a strong will, so it was very easy for him to become a self-centered conservative aristocrat. However, his loving parents were wise and good at guiding him patiently, and had cultivated his strong will into self-confidence rather than conceit. In this life, Commander Wenfeng had only done one thing that disappointed his parents, and that was to resolutely give up the inheritance of the family and throw himself under the command of the Grand Vexor, becoming the spy leader that all of Medica's enemies and even other nobles were afraid of. Don't be in a hurry to deny it. Sitting next to the short table in the middle of the room, the Great Weasel carefully flipped through the statistical materials presented by Commander Wenfeng as he slowly said without raising his head, I think that the saying greed blinds is very reasonable and profound. Commander Wenfeng still didn't say a word. As the head of the spies, he had already learned how to be a qualified listener. Blindly asking questions was never a good way to satisfy curiosity and solve doubt. Listening more was the way to go. As for gold, you must know that this metal has gradually withdrawn from the market of the Ash world for 100 years. Commander Wenfeng was naturally aware of this, and he also knew that all this was related to the Grand Vexor's secret collection. Almost all the gold that could be found was placed under the Lagoon Museum. There is enough space there. There is a strange city there, a city that belongs to you. Commander Wenfeng added in his heart. Everything that I did was not because of greed. You should be clear about this. In fact, it was just a special spell-casting material that I prepared for the completion of a certain spell. It was no different from bat dung or tinder flower. The Grand Vader raised his head and extended his hand. A crystal that had been cut into 6 facets floated in his hand and spun continuously. Through the transformation of gold, I obtained this crystal. As the hexagonal prism rotated, the light in the room seemed to be attracted to it. The crystal shone brightly. And it is the key to breaking the shackles that have troubled me and the entire Ash world for a long time. Sensing that the light in his eyes seemed to be attracted by the crystal, Commander Wenfeng couldn't help but ask, "Then, how much gold do you need to complete the spell-casting preparations?" "Perhaps, when Zagan Pasha completes his mission, my preparation work will come to an end." The Grand Vader and Commander Wenfeng conversed for about half an hourglass. At the same time, in another place of Bite City, a conversation was also going on. "Count Kunini, I belong to the Strategic Defense, Attack, and Logistics Bureau of Bader's First Layer territory. Job number 2274. I am here to give you the latest administrative notice. The notice is as follows. Kunini was not wearing a robe, which was rare. Instead, he wore a set of V-neck rune chainmail made by Batobi. It was the ceremonial attire of Bator that suited the status of a demon count. He stood in front of a fireplace that burned with a strange blood-red flame. This is to inform the manager of the Nine Hells outpost in the Ash Plain, Demon Count Kunini. Honorable Commander of Bader's Advance Army, Your Excellency Keys. According to the Bator Wartime Recuperation Regulations and the Elite Pentashade Dragon Seedling Cultivation Plan, the wartime recuperation has been completed. After the approval of the Evil Dragon Council, it is to be recalled immediately. The person in charge of the recuperation plane, Kunini, needs to provide all necessary assistance to the commander in a timely manner, as well as the Otherworld Gate that leads to the bloody battle front line and coordinates, confidential, see below. After the lengthy notice ended, the blood-red flame suddenly surged, and a Batsu holding a bronze box reached out from it. Please take this door box, Count Kunini. The voice from before spoke again. Honorable Keys will hold the door key in his hands. In order to ensure that he can appear at the bloody battle front line in his best condition, you will need to inject enough energy into this door box. When the corresponding key opens the box, the correct plane coordinates will be activated, and the precise Otherworld Gate will be constructed. All right, Kunini replied in a low voice. After he took the door box, the staff member of the Strategic Defense Attack and Logistics Bureau of the First Layer of Bator was still somewhat worried, so he warned, I must remind you that this commander's status is extraordinary. It is said that the Evil Dragon Council values him greatly. Please do not make any mistakes during the teleportation, or else. He listened as the other party recited the punishment methods of the Batsu bureaucratic organization, which had a particularly long name, in detail, as if he was reciting them silently. Kunini resisted the urge to pull the staff member out of the flames and patiently listened to everything. Humph, rotten dregs soaked in literature. When the flames were extinguished, the ambitious demon count could not help but curse loudly. If not for the fact that this residence had been set up with many spell formations to isolate all forms of detection, he would have been a demon count. His curses in the Batsu dialect, which was foul and evil in itself, could even distort the surrounding environment and mortals, causing all sorts of negative effects. However, what truly infuriated him was not the lengthy words of the Batsu compatriot. Medicus's Megalosaurus Pasha, the honorary commander of the Batsu Vanguard, this young blue dragon with many identities, was the fact that he had to return to the bloody battle front lines to report on his mission was what gave Kunini the greatest headache. It must be known that everything Kunini was doing now was for the sake of realizing his ambitions. He had spent a lot of effort to hide himself in the Ashen world in the corner of the multiverse. He wanted to push this world towards the 9 hells of Bartholomew to obtain Nessus reward, so that he could escape the awkward ranks of the devil. One of the most important arrangements was to hide his own information. However, Keys, the rising star of the Batsu Devil, would undoubtedly attract many prying eyes. Those fellows might, for the scheming Batsu Devil, it was almost certain that they would notice Kunini, the demon count hidden in this remote world. What is he doing there? What is his plan? Should we go take a look? In fact, Kanini could even foresee the way those guys would think. And if that happened, there was a high chance that his plan would be completely ruined. Chapter 325. Why did the plan go down the drain instead of being exposed first? Because Kanini knew the habits of the Batsu people very well. They would definitely be able to deduce part of the Devil Count's thoughts from the many clues, then they would use all kinds of tricks, and schemes. It didn't matter if it was beneficial to themselves, as long as they could harm others. Kanini himself had a similar plan. The notice only asked me to cooperate fully with the Megalosaurus to return to the Blood War's front lines, but if something happens to him before that, it has nothing to do with me. Stroking the bronze box in his hand and feeling the engraved patterns on it, Kanini casually threw it to the side. Since he had already removed the soundproof enchantment, the door box fell to the floor, making a loud clang sound of impact. Hearing this sound, a servant standing outside hurriedly pushed the door open. "Sir, what are your orders?" "I'm fine," Kanini said coldly as he glanced at the servant who was trying to get his master's praise. "It's just that you came in at an unlucky time, just like a certain guy." So, a green ray shot out from between Kanini's fingers and entered the unlucky servant's body. He didn't even have time to let out a cry before he quickly melted like a lit candle. Then, the viscous liquid quickly dried, turning into pieces of light green debris. Kanini waved his hand and a whirlwind appeared out of thin air, sweeping up the debris and flying it out of the door through the crack. "The timing is not right. I'll definitely be implicated. It's better to let him turn into ashes," the Devil Count secretly pondered. In order to realize his ambition, he was certain of his idea. He walked in front of his experiment table, fiddling with the new soul energy collector that he had just finished adjusting. Because he was distracted, his fingers accidentally left a few dents on the surface of this intricate magical object. When he discovered that the model he made was damaged, Kanini angrily threw it to the side. This strange object that he had reported to Pharaoh, capable of collecting soul energy, was actually modified from a normal soul prism casting tool. When Kanini was studying in the depths of the 9 prisons of Bader, he relied on copying Nessa's soul casting tool to earn a huge amount of tuition for himself. Therefore, making soul energy collectors now could at most be considered as resuming his old business, not a problem at all. Now, what really gave him a headache was how to deal with the Megalosaurus Pasha, who was about to return to work. After observing the battle between Keys and the Demon Lord's incarnation, the Devil Count didn't believe that he could easily kill him in a head-on fight. He even had a faint feeling that the young blue dragon had other hidden powers. "I can only use my wits, not brute force." Kanini laid down for himself the principles of his actions. He quickly searched through his memories, trying to find a targeted plan. After racking his brains for a long time, he finally found a formula in his mind. This Devil Count still had to benefit from his studies in the depths of the 9 prisons of Bader, which allowed him to know many special techniques that far surpassed his peers. Dragon-slaying medicine, Kanini recalled the name of the formula: black nightshade stamen, ash mushroom paste, manticore venom, belladonna powder, strangling kiss, and the most important one. He stretched his finger under the runic chainmail, aimed at his own chest, and stabbed it with all his strength. The Devil Count used his fingertip to press against his beating heart, and with a light flick, his whole body twitched. Fortunately, his other arm caught the table in time, so he didn't fall to the ground. Pulling his finger out of the hole in his chest, Kanini's muscles began to wriggle, quickly healing the wound on his body. A drop of blood from the powerful Batsu devil's heart, full of resentment. He tried his best to overcome the weakness in his body, kept his arm steady, and dripped the ink-black blood from his fingertip into a glass test tube, and then carefully sealed the tube. Together, they create a potent poison that can destroy the life of a Megalosaurus. As for the effects of the dragon-slaying potion, the Demon Count had never tested it on a giant dragon. However, He had added some into the daily tonic of a fellow student of the same level as Batsu, and he had successfully become an honorary graduate of that year. Therefore, Kunini was very confident in the toxicity of the medicine. As for the remaining ingredients, he had a way to quickly get his hands on them. But how to make Keys take the dragon-slaying medicine was the only problem left. I can only take a risk, he remembered something. If you want to do something well, you have to do it yourself. The design of Bite City was like a wheel. All the important buildings, administrative departments, official residences, and ancient noble mansions, were located on the axle of the wheel. The whole city revolved around the axle, never stopping for a moment. 8 wide avenues extended outward from the central city like the spokes of a wheel. Evergreen broad-leaved trees stood on both sides of the avenues, their leaves spreading out to provide shade for pedestrians on the roads. Some of these avenues led to the southern land wall, while others led to the Lingang district, which was being renovated. They were the main transportation channels for the flow of people in the city, and they also never stopped. There was no doubt that whether it was the buildings that symbolized the ruling power or the avenues that were like arteries, they connected to the heart or the brain of Bite City, which was Pharaoh's palace. On the 15th day after the end of the Devil's disaster, when the seawater purification project in the fjords was mostly completed, and when almost all the nobles and merchants of Bite had installed domestic purification pumps, Pharaoh fulfilled his promise. Esinder summoned all the nobles to his palace for a grand celebratory banquet. Megalosaurus Pasha, the pot-bellied general, said with a smile. As usual, he was the one who invited Keys to attend the dinner. Today, let's go to Pharaoh's palace together. I've been thinking about the cherry spirits stored in His Majesty's cellar for a long time. This time, I'll drink to my heart's content. As if to prove his determination to drink to his heart's content, the general crossed his arms and made an exaggerated gesture of hugging a wine barrel. However, it did not take long for him to regret his words. Hearing the pot-bellied general's praise for the cherry spirits, the ogre gourmet Brew immediately expressed that he would like to try more of them. Looking at Brew's huge figure, the pot-bellied general prayed for himself while estimating how much wine he could get. When Brew's brother, the strong ogre Nalu, appeared in the party, the pot-bellied general completely gave up the idea of fighting for the wine. He could only hope that Pharaoh's cellar was spacious enough. Chapter 326. In order to show his generosity, Pharaoh prepared a lot of food for the guests he invited. There were no less than 20 main dishes. Bright and colorful honey chicken pie, a small mountain of lemon cake, fragrant and creamy quail and spiced duck, large pieces of pepper wild boar ribs, whole roast goose, roast chicken skewers and pigeon skewers that were constantly being served by the waiters, barley beef, onions that were simmered in spices and gravy. In addition, the master of Bite City ordered people to go out to sea and bring seafood sealed in salt and algae, whitefish and snails, crabs and mussels, clams, herring, cod, salmon, lobsters and eels. Some of these seafood were iced, sliced, and dipped in sauces for eating, some were added with spices for barbecue, and some were directly cooked in a big pot before being served on the table. The whole banquet hall was filled with black bread, oatmeal biscuits, turnips, peas and beets, soybeans, pumpkins and red onions, as well as flavored apples, berry cakes, and pears boiled in spirit. White cheese was placed beside the salt dish on each table, and pots of spiced mulled wine and iced lager were held in the arms of the waiters for the guests to take at any time. Of course, the cherry liquor that the big-bellied general had been longing for was also generously taken out from the cellar by Pharaoh. Small buckets were neatly placed next to the seat of the military aristocrat of Medici. Isidore had fulfilled his promise. Because the food was too sumptuous and the number of guests invited was too large. The banquet tables were arranged all the way to the outside of the palace, occupying half of the garden square before all the guests were settled down. When the carriage came to the gate of the palace, Keys saw that the whole building was surrounded by a hazy halo. As the carriage approached, he saw 8 huge light sources outside the rectangular building. The huge trays were lit with flames that were as bright as campfires but much more stable. There were mirrors behind the trays, allowing the light to shine directly over the garden square. It's filled with alchemy-processed magnesite. The big-bellied general noticed the young blue dragon's curious gaze. He stepped forward and explained, "That's why it's so bright. It can be used as a searchlight during wartime. But today it's just for illumination." As he spoke, he opened his hand and gestured for the Megalosaurus Pasha to enter the banquet hall. Keyes obeyed. The young blue dragon's companions followed behind him. Other than the Demolic, who could not show his face, the 3 ogre brothers, the desert elf Brock, who was wearing a hooded robe, and the paladin Jensen were all present at the banquet. Since they would be returning to the front lines in the next 2 days, Keyes gathered all of his subordinates. Pharaoh had organized a grand banquet today, just in time to settle the 3 ogre brothers' dinner. As expected of the monarch of the Medici Empire, the banquet is indeed grand. Brew commented as he ate the food piled on both sides of the aisle. "Oh, the food tastes good. The chefs are also experienced." Unlike Brew, who was immersed in a sea of delicious food, the rest of Keyes's team was very quiet. After knowing that they were about to go to the abyss, everyone was adjusting their mentality and enjoying the last moment of peace before the war. Compared to the others, Brock, who was from the Salem tribe, was the most emotional. After becoming a member of Keyes's team, the desert elf had refreshed his understanding of the multiverse almost every day. From the very beginning of the Salem tribe, to participating in the reconstruction of Gnome City, to conquering the island world, and most recently, participating in the encirclement of a demon lord's incarnation. Not long after, he had the opportunity to head to the bottomless abyss to challenge the demons. "The world is changing so fast," Brock sighed in his heart. He looked at the magnificent palace as he walked. If he was still the chief warrior of the Salem tribe, he would have been overwhelmed. But now, he could look at it casually. He could even see that many of the decorations were clearly products sold by the scale of perpetual order. For example, the stained glass inlaid on the windows, the carved water clock timer inlaid with silver, the fanatic armor ornament branded with the emblem of the Naroya lion, the latest purifying water pump. As Keyes and the others filed in, Pharaoh got up to greet them. The entire palace instantly became lively. But just behind the noise, there was an undercurrent surging towards the young blue dragon. President Kunini. Leaning against the pillar outside the palace, Commander Wenfeng called out the name of the person behind him without looking. The demon count was still invisible. "This time, you owe us a favor." After saying these words, Medic, who was one of the top spies in the Ashen world, raised his arm, hooked a silver jug filled with fine wine with his finger, and handed it to the other party's line of sight. Kunini, who had just come out of the back kitchen and deliberately put in the freshly made dragon-killing potion, suddenly had a cold look in his eyes. Of course, he recognized the silver jug. The servant whose mind had been distorted by magic had told him that the silver jug contained fine wine that Pharaoh had specially prepared for the Megalosaurus Pasha. "What do you want to do?" Without any movement, a layer of lavender film appeared around Kunini and Commander Wenfeng, as if the space they were in had been cut out of the Ashen world. The servants around them did not react at all. However, even though his tracks had been exposed, he still didn't immediately kill Commander Wenfeng. Even if he really did want to, Kunini had to admit that someone who dared to expose his poisoning would definitely leave a backup plan for himself. "I should be the one asking you that." Commander Wenfeng did not panic at all. He straightened his body and turned to face Kunini. "The president of the Obsidian Council, or perhaps a certain great devil lurking in this world, sir." After his identity was exposed, Kunini relaxed. If the other party was bluffing him, then his overreaction would confirm his guess. If the other party had already confirmed his identity as a demon count, then no matter how eloquent he was, there was no way he could dispel the other party's suspicions. Based on the game theory he learned in the academy in the depths of the Nine Hells, the current situation, seeing through his identity but not saying it out loud, could only mean that the other party was trying to blackmail him, or even had the intention to cooperate. A mortal trying to blackmail a demon count? Kunini would definitely say, "Bring it on," and then use the contract theory that humans could not fully understand to turn the other party into a soul prism in his wallet, the kind that jingled. And if Count Wenfeng wanted to cooperate with him, Kunini was a little interested, or rather, quite moved. Chapter 327. Tell me, what are your conditions? Kunini didn't mince his words. The barrier he maintained was in Pharaoh's palace, after all, so it could be noticed at any time. Cooperation, but only this time. Commander Wenfeng flicked his finger, and the silver pot filled with dragon-killing medicine flew out. Kunini caught the wine pot, and not a single drop of wine spilled out. Who am I cooperating with? You or His Excellency the Great Vader? He didn't ask about the details of the cooperation, but first wanted to know who he was cooperating with. This completely different way of thinking from mortals proved that Kunini was a qualified Batsu devil. His train of thought was very clear. You can interpret it however you want. Commander Wenfeng muttered to himself, and gave an answer that was neither positive nor negative. It's just that you want to deal with the Megalosaurus Pasha. Right now, it does indeed conform to the long-term interests of the Medici Empire. Hearing these hypocritical words, Kunini lightly spat. You should know, he sneered, compared to purgatory language, the language you mortals use to describe certain facts has many loopholes. Of course, this doesn't prevent us from cooperating. All the cooperation was based on a consensus. Through a simple understanding, Kunini was surprised to find that the reason why the Great Vader sent Commander Wenfeng to communicate with him and attempt to murder a Megalosaurus Pasha was because of the Great Vader's desire for the gold resources controlled by Key's Chamber of Commerce. Calamity Coin. He silently recited the common name for gold coins used by the lower realms demons. This demon count couldn't help but sigh. As expected, it's wealth that brings calamity to its owner. Compared to mortals, it seems that we see things more clearly. But despite his silent criticism, Kunini was still very satisfied with the terms of the cooperation. Commander Wenfeng promised that he would provide Kunini with a more covert method of poisoning with a higher success rate. In return, Kunini had to cooperate with the Great Vader in the following period of time to remove the scale of perpetual order. You have to tell me what kind of stealthier poisoning method is, and prove that this method has a higher success rate. Out of his cautious nature, as well as his pride in his knowledge, Kunini didn't believe that mortals were better than him when it came to poisoning. And once the plan against the Megalosaurus Pasha was exposed, because the dragon-slaying medicine contained his own blood and resentment, he would definitely bear the brunt of the other party's crazy revenge. That was the truth. The demons of the lower realms were always the best candidates to take the blame, so he had no choice but to be careful. As if he expected Kunini to have such a request, Commander Wenfeng took out an object from his bosom, a small cobalt-blue sculpture that emitted a hazy halo. It was carved into a megalosaurus with its wings raised, but the carving was very ordinary and far from being vivid. Even an ordinary person would be able to tell at a glance that this was a cheap item. What is this? Kunini asked seriously. He didn't believe that the thing Commander Wenfeng took out after talking for so long was completely useless. This is a cursed sculpture from Big Two. In short, this is a very useful magical item, Commander Wenfeng explained. He had to dispel the demon count's doubts. The material came from the scales that the Megalosaurus Pasha dropped during the fierce battle with the Demon Lord's incarnation during the Demon Calamity. We searched the entire Bite City and the fjords, but only found one. Its only use is that your poison doesn't need to come into direct contact, it can affect the other party indirectly. Kunini's eyes lit up. Commander Wenfeng silently chanted an incantation, and a crack appeared on the back of the rough megalosaurus sculpture. He motioned for Kunini to take the poisoned wine in his hand and pour it into the sculpture through the crack. So, the poison can take effect? The demon count stared at the sculpture and asked nervously. Commander Wenfeng carefully held the sculpture flat, and once again chanted an incantation. The crack on the back of the dragon-shaped sculpture automatically closed. Of course not, this is only to make it work. Commander Wenfeng's words made the Batsu devil, who was used to playing with words, a little confused, but fortunately he continued to explain. But there is still one step. Only when that step is completed can the poison finally affect the cursed sculpture's body. In the banquet hall, toasts were exchanged. According to the customs of Medic, when entertaining guests, the host had to let the other party finish all kinds of main dishes before they could start to socialize. Although many people were drinking and chatting, most of them sat in their seats and whispered a few words to their acquaintances. And those who couldn't wait to start socializing at this moment would be regarded as lacking etiquette. But some people didn't care. For example, when he saw Keys sit down, Zagan Pasha's eyes lit up. Perhaps it was because of the extraterrestrial islanders, or perhaps it was on purpose. The ruler of the archipelago did not care about the gazes of others. He carried the braised codfish that he had specially brought along with his meal and walked towards Quith. Before he arrived, the smell arrived first. Although he was a citizen of the foodie empire in his previous life, he had eaten stinky tofu, soy milk, and other food. But the smell of the braised codfish still exceeded Keys's tolerance limit. The young blue dragon in human form raised his strawberry drink and pretended to drink it, hoping to dispel Zagan Pasha's attempt to talk. But unexpectedly, the other party walked to Keys's side as if they were familiar with each other. After he swallowed the drink in his mouth, he said enthusiastically, "Sir Keys." He handed the special product from the archipelago domain forward. "I saw you try this delicacy last time, so I specially sent some people from the archipelago domain to send some over on a fast boat. I guarantee it's the most authentic." No wonder. Keys couldn't help but feel sad. No wonder this plate of braised codfish smells stronger than last time. Just as the young blue dragon was thinking about whether he should cast a spell like Burning Sun Explosion on this plate of food from time to time, Ogre Brew, who was also stimulated by the smell, came over, grabbed a piece of braised codfish from the plate, threw it into his mouth, and chewed a few times. The taste is not bad. This ogre gourmet gave a pertinent evaluation, as if Zagan Pasha had met a confidant. The codfish seems to have melted, and there's a special salty aroma that spontaneously arises. As long as you can endure the choking smell, this kind of food is actually not bad. After saying that, he picked up the plate and poured the rest of the braised codfish soup into his mouth. Chapter 328. The banquet lasted until late at night. Pharaoh's enthusiasm made all the guests very satisfied. The big-bellied general drank the cherry liquor as he wished. The unlimited supply of food made the ogre gourmet blue eat heartily. Zagan Pasha chatted happily with Keys, and the two sides finalized a trade route used to transport the specialties of the archipelago. When the midnight bell rang, everyone immediately understood that the clock tower that was severely damaged in the Devil's Calamity had been rebuilt. The applause followed and lasted for a long time. Pharaoh drank the last glass of wine and sent everyone off. With his companions, Keys walked to the carriage prepared for him outside the palace. He was going to visit Kunini. He had received the order to return to the front line of the blood war a few days ago, and he had also received the door key. Today was the day of departure. Everyone, get ready. Through the use of psionic energy, the young blue dragon established a telepathic link with all his companions. After all, he was about to embark on a journey to the abyss, so he felt that he had to warn them. Suddenly, Keys had a feeling of uneasiness. Thanks to the high perception of the Megalosaurus race, most Megalosaurus would have the ability to sense danger. But just now, for some reason, Keys's instincts seemed to be suppressed. But when he used his psionic ability, he saw that the 5 skundas were empty, and he felt that there was an abnormal energy lingering around him. Keys felt that his perception was blocked, and at the same time, there seemed to be a faint curse entangling him. The ogre gourmet blue? Be careful! Feeling threatened, the young blue dragon didn't care about anything else. After reminding everyone, he immediately transformed into the Megalosaurus with the strongest combat power. However, dark green lines spread around him. At first, they looked like uneven, bony fingers, then they turned into a creepy vine shape that quickly spread to his entire body. As if he was being wrapped up, Quest felt his own weakness, as well as a sharp pain that penetrated deep into his bones. Whether it was a curse or poison, the young blue dragon had no way of knowing what would harm him. However, there was a characteristic of the Batsu Devil clan in that shadowy power, which he could not ignore. Kunini, the young blue dragon roared in his mind, I definitely won't let you off. Although his strength had been weakened, Keys could still feel that his active adaptive ability was working. As long as Blue. What's wrong with you? Paru Keys, take a look. The ogre, Neru, was on his guard until he felt a hand on his shoulder from behind. He turned his head abruptly and saw that his brother Blue's face had turned green. He was leaning on his shoulder with all his might to prevent himself from falling to the ground. Just like Karth, Gourmet Blue's entire body was covered in dark green runes. Seeing this, the young blue dragon did not hesitate at all. He immediately used Remove Curse and Remove Poison to heal Brew first. The ogre Gourmet didn't react in the slightest, which meant it wasn't a curse. The Remove Poison spell had some effect, however, as the runes on the ogre Gourmet's body faded a little. But it was quickly counterattacked by the poison, and more runes began to spread. One had to know that the 3 ogre brothers were all ogres with exceptional talent. Back in the bottomless abyss, Brew had used the local specialties that were highly toxic to produce and brew many poison-like foods and liquors. After trying them one by one, he only needed to consume some of Palu's Huaxiang Morality potion to detoxify the poison. Now, however, even though he'd swallowed the potion, the ogre shaman pulled out a pouch and stuffed the antidote into Blue's mouth at the same time as Key's spell. Like the spell, the effect was minimal. Palu took out 2 yellow ox stones and stuffed one into Brew's throat. Brew patted his chest to help him swallow it down. Then, he shouted at Keys, Open your mouth! Paru threw the other yellow ox stone to Keys. Eat some gold. It'll complement the yellow ox stone. After instructing the young blue dragon, Paru pulled out 2 pieces of gold foil that had been hammered until they were almost translucent and stuffed them into Blue's mouth. The ogre shaman's first aid potion was effective. Keys felt a little better after swallowing the gold from the interspatial pouch. However, Blue's body was far weaker than the young blue dragon's, so he was still in a critical condition. He couldn't even stand straight. At the same time, the abnormality of Keys's party attracted the attention of others. Do it, Ma. Yes, sir. After the Sun Duty clan general and the fire dwarf chieftain acknowledged the order, the 2 of them immediately passed down the order. The Sun Duty clan and the fire dwarf clan's warriors, who had been prepared for a long time, picked up their weapons again, not long after. With an impassioned incantation, the Grand Vader cast the Dragon's Covenant, a summoning spell that he hadn't used during the Devil Calamity. It was specially used to deal with the young blue dragon. If you don't say it, you'll say my name. But if you say it, you'll be far away from me. Say it. What am I? A brass dragon with a pair of wings descended from the night sky. His eyes, which resembled molten metal balls, revealed his age. But even so, the brass dragon still maintained his wicked hobby of asking people to guess riddles. Silence, the Grand Vader replied. Correct answer. The ancient brass dragon flew low in the sky, stirring up sand and dust. Mortal, what is your request? The Grand Vader said coldly, Kill that blue dragon. Hearing this request, the brass dragon was stunned for a moment. He didn't actually smell the blue dragon's stench in the air. However, due to the dragon's covenant, he had to unconditionally help the person who could summon him and answer his riddle. As you wish, but only this once. After that, you and I don't owe each other anything. With that, the behemoth cast his gaze at the young dragon that the Grand Vader had identified as the blue dragon. Very unlucky, but before he could finish his long-winded words, the furious Keys had already taken the lead and pounced on this disrespectful old man. Don't linger. Take blue and leave this place. Go to the terminal and gather everyone. Through his psionic ability, Keys explained his arrangement to everyone while he stayed behind to cover for the others. Ahead of the young blue dragon's fangs and claws, the fan-shaped force field arrived first and bombarded the base of the ancient brass dragon's wing. With a cracking sound, the wing on one side of the brass dragon's wing drooped instantly, apparently broken. And while the other party cried out in pain, Keys came to his side, opened his bloody mouth, and bit the side of the dragon's neck. My life is over. Suddenly, the ancient brass dragon was scared out of his wits. Chapter 329. It was easy to die suddenly if you talked too much, whether you were a good guy or a bad guy. Thanks to several previous evolutions, in terms of physical fitness alone, he was obviously not weaker than his mutated dragon predecessors. Even because of the bloodline of the power dragon, his strength growth was even more terrifying. In the face of such a furious beast, the ancient brass dragon couldn't even exert half of its strength. Then Keys, who had been known as the Giant Skull since childhood, sealed its throat with a kiss, and blood gushed out like a spring. In addition, he then grabbed its wound, pulled the ancient brass dragon's body, and gave it a euphoria hell fall. Without any resistance, this metal dragon summoned by the Great Vader's Dragon Covenant collapsed to the ground as a corpse in a single exchange. In the spirit of respect for the enemy, Keys finally added a super electromagnetic gun to ensure that it would fall into eternal sleep. The metal shuttle fired in anger cut off the ancient brass dragon's proud head, so that he could no longer force anyone to play the guessing game. Grand Vader, Keys let out a roar. He wanted to intimidate this unexpected enemy. At present, the young blue dragon was still hesitating, or estimating his chances of winning against the #1 master of Medici. But who would have thought that the other party was not moved at all? It was as if the ancient brass dragon that had just been summoned at a high price had suddenly died. To him, it didn't affect him at all. Oh no, Keys immediately realized something. There must be a trick in this. But it was too late now. Recruiting the ancient brass dragon to help in the battle was actually just to delay some time, like a mouse pulling a wooden wedge. The real move against the young blue dragon was yet to come. A smile appeared on this contemporary Alan's face. The spell he had carefully prepared was completed. With a wave of his hand, the roofs of the houses on both sides of the street were lifted. The casting materials that had been piled up here, the alchemy solution in many wooden barrels splashed out, smashed the seals on the barrels, and gathered into ribbons to bind Keys. The young blue dragon immediately constructed a force field shield around him, trying to separate the amber translucent liquid from his body. However, the force field ability that had been very useful in the past didn't work this time. Through the previous battle against the Demon Lord Incarnation, the Grand Dimensional had already understood Keys's combat instincts and specially designed a corresponding restraining plan for it. At this moment, the young blue dragon using a force field shield naturally did not exceed his expectations. Extreme spell effect, order collapse. Now that he was prepared, even the incantation was omitted. He only muttered the password and then made a casting gesture. The preset spell was activated. This was a spell created by the Grand Vader to restrain the young blue dragon's force field ability and psychic ability. Its effect was very simple, which was to cause all defensive abilities other than the spell shield to collapse. Under the influence of the information difference, the Grand Vader had caught the young blue dragon by surprise. Before he could add a new layer of protection, as the force field barrier collapsed, the amber solution was quickly applied to Keyes' body. Like real amber, the alchemy solution quickly solidified and sealed the young blue dragon. Keyes! The brawny ogre Neru roared. Desert Elf Brock and Paladin Jason, who were fighting against the swarm of Sun Watchmen and Fire Dwarves, also noticed the young blue dragon being imprisoned. Moreover, as if gravity had disappeared, Keyes, who was sealed in amber, was still floating in the sky. Shield bash, armor break. Shattering sound. Voodoo, pearl of dissolution. Steam repeating crossbow. They all used their long-range attacks in an attempt to destroy the amber crystal that imprisoned Keyes, but it was to no avail. Taking advantage of the moment when he was distracted, the elites of the Sun Watchmen and the Fire Dwarves, who had copper skin and iron bones, quickly closed in. In addition, Brew was poisoned and collapsed to the ground. They were momentarily put in a passive position. "Hurry up and leave," the ogre gourmet said with difficulty. He leaned on the wailing harpoon to stay upright. "Hurry up to the terminal." Hearing his brother's words, Neru roared. He raised his ebony chain with one hand and swung it out horizontally. A few of the nearby Sun Watchmen were instantly sent flying by the immense force, breaking their bones and tendons as they fell to the ground. The weapon's master raised the steam-repeating crossbow in his other hand. Whoosh, 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 whoosh. The crossbow bolts whistled through the air as they shot out. Accompanied by the sound of the crossbow bolts tearing through the chain armor and the painful cries of the people who were hit by the bolts, Neru said without turning his head, "Don't worry, Brew. We can smash all these bad-hearted dwarves into little pancakes." Seemingly intimidated by the brawny ogre's ferocity, the elites of the Sun Watchmen did not dare to attack him rashly. They turned to hide behind the Fire Dwarf warriors, letting their companions, who had copper skin and iron bones and were holding thick shields, act as their cover. "Don't worry, Brew." Which Dr. Paru also comforted his brother. "Hurry up and take your medicine. I'm here." As he spoke, the ogre, who was good at using voodoo, waved the troll skull staff in his hand. Dense, ominous green smoke surged out. Under his guidance, the smoke was like a tide, drowning the Fire Dwarves in the front row of the enemy. Cries of pain rose and fell one after another. The Fire Dwarves, who rarely felt pain, were now rolling on the ground like gourds. Their metal skin cracked, emitting scorching smoke. "Be careful of his smoke, it's a strong atomized acid," a Fire Dwarf captain roared loudly to remind his tribesmen, but he also swallowed some of the smoke into his stomach. With a few clangs, he threw the weapon and shield in his hand to his feet and clutched his throat tightly with both hands. While he was still conscious, the Fire Dwarf captain looked down at his chest, only to see the scenery behind him. Fry! The Fire Dwarf chief, who was standing in the distance, was held down by several of his subordinates. He saw with his own eyes that his children, the birth of every Fire Dwarf was shaped and given life by their elders with a hammer, had turned into a pool of steaming metal slag on the ground. There was no chance of saving them at all. The chief of the Pickaxe clan was furious. He wanted to pounce on the ogre Paru and smash him into powder, but his responsibility as the leader of the clan and his remaining reason made him restrain his impulse. Retreat first. He raised his hand and knocked on the body of a companion beside him, making a sound like cymbals. Maintain the encirclement and wait for the Grand Vader. He should be able to make his move soon. Chapter 330. Your Majesty. An attendant hurriedly rushed into Pharaoh's bedroom. Megalosaurus Pasha was ambushed by the Grand Vader. Due to drinking some wine at the banquet, Essidor's mind was already a little unclear. But when he heard this news, he still forced himself to stand up and took the towel from the attendant who took care of his daily life. Using the towel soaked in ice water and mint essential oil, he wiped his face and felt his mind clear a lot. "Tell me, what's going on and what's the situation now?" This was what Pharaoh had always asked of his attendants, so the person who came to report did not bother to salute and reported the situation concisely. "We don't know the cause, but Megalosaurus Pasha is currently in a critical situation. The Grand Vader had a sniffer unit, and Essador naturally had his own eyes and ears. Although it was not completely clear why the Grand Vader, an ally who had fought against the Demon Lord's incarnation a few days ago, suddenly became enemies with Keys, the Megalosaurus Pasha. But it was not difficult to know the real-time development of the situation at this time. Summon the black-robed mages and the Naroya guards who are currently on duty in the palace and send my commander's seal to the Praetorian Legion station." Pharaoh thought for a moment before instructing. "Let them be on standby, but don't act rashly." Essador had his own considerations for making such a decision. Notifying the forces under his control in the city to prepare was actually because he was worried that the Grand Vader would have follow-up actions that might threaten his safety, although this possibility was not great. Although he now had some guesses about the Grand Vader's motives and knew that Keys might have been ambushed because he coveted the gold, and as the subject of the Pasha's loyalty, he was obligated to provide protection for the young blue dragon. But Essador was not ready to act rashly at this time. He could not take the risk of splitting the Medici Empire. At least until the dust settled, Pharaoh was prepared to hold back for the time being. Similar decisions were passed down from top to bottom in many privileged families and then carried out. Therefore, even though the two groups of people were fighting fiercely on the street, no one reacted immediately. Everyone was waiting to see what would happen. Of course, in all fairness, everyone, including Essador, was more optimistic about the Great Vader than the young blue dragon. As it turned out, their foresight was not bad. Keys, who was stuck in the amber, tried many methods to break the seal, but they all failed. Due to the lack of oxygen, his consciousness had begun to blur. However, his active adaptation was taking effect, allowing him to slowly adapt to an environment without oxygen. It would have been fine if that was all, but the key was that the poison in Keys's body had not been completely removed. Active self-adaptation had multiple roles. Even with the divine power plundered from the camel god of the island world as a supplement, he was still overworked. Although Keys's companions were strong in combat and had beaten the Day Watchmen and the Fire Dwarf warriors to the point of being unable to fight back, that was under the premise that the Great Vader had not made a move. When the number 1 spellcaster of Medici finished concocting the young blue dragon and freed himself, their situation took a turn for the worse. The situation instantly became precarious. "I'm sorry, but your lives today. You can't take it." Accompanied by the sound of a whistle, the steampunk half-lich appeared behind the Great Vader. He touched the Great Vader's shoulder with his sharp claws, which were enshrouded in an evil aura. "This is a spell developed by myself. Please evaluate it." Touch of Death. At the cost of giving up the form of array attack and using a more stringent touch spellcasting, Snade increased the lethality of the original Finger of Death spell, as well as the probability of instant death. In the plane of Acid Fog Canyon, he had used this spell, together with the venomous-tongued but absolutely powerful mechanical warrior monk, to bestow eternal slumber on the wolf-snake demon warlord, who was like a rare animal in the bottomless abyss. However, the expected scene of the enemy turning into ashes did not happen. The Great Vader, who had been hit by such a powerful spell, only grunted, and a hexagonal crystal floated on the surface of his body. In an instant there was a burst of light, and a surge of heat surged out. Snade, who was far away from the Great Vader, bore the brunt of the heat. His mechanical prosthetic hands began to melt and deform under the high temperature. The light lit up the night sky, and the entire street was as bright as day. For a moment everyone found it difficult to open their eyes. Under the illumination of this light, the dark energy on the great Vader, who had been injured by the touch of death, quickly dissipated. Flaming sun impact. Sneyd tapped the hexagonal crystal with his finger, and a blazing light beam shot out, accurately hitting the rapidly retreating steampunk half-lich. The great Vader's palm twisted as if he was unscrewing a valve that regulated energy. The gathered light suddenly expanded, completely annihilating Sneyd. The half-lich, who was also a legendary mage, was not even able to add a spell shield for himself. He was melted into a pile of scrap metal by this fierce counterattack and fell from the sky. You can't even withstand a single blow. After dealing with the spellcaster who had suddenly appeared, the great Vader recited a spell and put the hexagonal crystal back into his body. While squinting his eyes to adapt to the darkness of the night, he looked at the young blue dragon's followers. But who would have thought that a strange skull, the half-lich Sneyd, who had lost his mechanical prosthetic limbs, would appear among the group of people on the ground. The demonic soul flames in his eye sockets flashed fiercely like will-o'-the-wisps, and an escape spell was instantly activated. Sneyd was still experienced, and he had already prepared a backup plan for his surprise attack. In fact, when Keyes summoned him to assist in the battle through the contract, he had also given him the right to take advantage of the situation. But there was only one thing, and that was to take away Keyes's companions as much as possible. The young blue dragon still had a life-saving trump card to use. The power of the abyss that he had previously obtained was now stored in the spirit crystal servant that was like his clone. If his main body died, he would return to the abyss and be reborn like a demon that died in the material plane. But not to mention how big the risk was, Keyes would inevitably mix with the demon bloodline of the abyss, and in the end, it could bring about great repercussions. So, Keyes was still trying to break free from the cage, and he would not use this trump card if he could. Seeing that the targets of the ambush had all escaped, but fortunately, the main target had not escaped. This result is acceptable, the great Vader secretly estimated, and then cast a shrinking spell on the amber block that imprisoned Keyes. Take this Megalosaurus Pasha away. Chapter 331. If the enemy doesn't move, I won't move. I won't move and I won't move. This was the strategy of the young blue dragon imprisoned in the amber crystal. Unfortunately, the Grand Wektal cast the shrinking spell on the crystal together with Keyes inside. Although it was not as exaggerated as turning it into a sugar cube, it became the size of a farmhouse and could be placed on the transport vehicle prepared in advance by the fire dwarf craftsman. Take the Megalosaurus Pasha to the Lagoon Museum and put him in my laboratory, the Grand Wektal ordered after loading the vehicle. Because of the amber alchemy material that imprisoned Keyes, the young blue dragon who was captured could not be transferred by the teleportation spell. He could only be pulled away by the reinforced frame of the wide-tailed carriage. So the Grand Wektal personally escorted him, just in case. Of course, after the young blue dragon's followers escaped, he did not forget that there was a terminal building of the scale of perpetual order in Byte City. You go and take over the property of the Megalosaurus Pasha in Byte City. The Grand Wektal did not mention the word terminal in his words, but the generals on duty and Commander Wenfeng who heard the order understood tacitly. If there is any resistance, don't hesitate to kill them. At this time, the southern terminal building of Byte City was brightly lit. The kobolds of the Dragon Clan were busy nervously. They had received the news that the Lord of the Dragon Nest was ambushed and were preparing to evacuate. The brothers One Eye and Crooked Mouth and Santos, the senior manager of the Scale of Perpetual Order, were responsible for taking care of the relevant affairs. At this time, the three of them were as busy as ants on a hot pan. Fortunately, there was still order and they were not in a mess. And this was thanks to the guidance of the emergency manual issued by Keyes. With the idea of being prepared, The young blue dragon had once simulated a similar situation in his mind and gave the corresponding advice. It happened so suddenly that we had no choice but to blow up the terminal. One Eye and Crooked Mouth used to be bandits after all, and they had many different views compared to the fat merchant who cherished his wealth. We can't bring the floating behemoth with us in this terminal. Staying here will only help the enemy. Okay. Santos wiped the sweat off his forehead out of habit. In the end, he used reason to overcome his greed. He said with a pained heart, "You guys can do whatever you want. I'll go to the animal pen. Those little guys are the precious assets of the Chamber of Commerce. They can all be brought onto the airship. Not a single one can be left behind." Not long after the fat merchant left the terminal and personally herded the sand rhinoceros into the cabin, the sentries on duty outside the terminal fired warning fireworks into the sky. They had discovered troops closing in from all sides. But there were two of them. One Eye, who had been paying attention to the situation, was puzzled. But the situation waited for no one. He immediately asked Crooked Mouth to activate the last defense measure and ordered everyone to board the airship immediately. The floating behemoth began to discharge the sand ballast. Before ambushing Keys, in order not to let the young blue dragon notice, the Grand Vader did not make any arrangements for the properties of the scale of perpetual order in Bite City. Therefore, the terminal was given a certain amount of time to evacuate. But when the young blue dragon was successfully captured, these properties became ownerless wealth and were coveted by many people. The Imperial Guard Legion and the Day Watchman Troop, two elite troops that appeared to belong to the Medici Empire, faced each other with their swords drawn across the street. They were in a tense standoff. By the order of Pharaoh, the commander of the Imperial Guard Legion was not the big-bellied general who was familiar with Keys, but another high-ranking military aristocrat. He let the captain of his bodyguards report loudly, "Bite City is temporarily under curfew, and this area is temporarily listed as a military-controlled area. We have no intention to offend the authority of Pharaoh," one of the Day Watchmen, who stood across the street with a spear, sword, and shield, walked out. It was the Day Watchman who was in charge of the command of this troop. "However, the Grand Vader has ordered us to capture the subordinates of Megalosaurus Pasha, and they are now hiding in the terminal building. The previous Devil disaster is closely related to this Megalosaurus Pasha." But no matter how the Day Watchman explained, and even brought up the Grand Vader's order, the Imperial Guard Legion general in front of him always showed an attitude of, "I won't listen if you don't listen," which made the Day Watchman furious. Unable to bear it, the Day Watchman clasped his hands together, and the Vajra palms on his hands collided with each other, making a loud noise. "Then we won't stand on ceremony." Just as the Day Watchman was about to forcefully break through the blockade of the Imperial Guard Legion general, the guard post in the terminal building not far away discovered the situation. They shot 2 fireworks into the sky and they bloomed. This time, even the Imperial Guard Legion general understood that the subordinates of Megalosaurus Pasha in the terminal building had obviously discovered them, and it was very likely that they would take the floating airship and fly away. "Rush into the terminal building, don't let them leave," the Day Watchman immediately roared at the Imperial Guard Legion general without waiting for the order. The Imperial Guard Legion general, who was in a state of confrontation just now, immediately did as he was told. Pharaoh ordered them to take over the terminal building. If the other party all escaped, he would not be able to explain it to Eshin. However, when the two parties rushed into the terminal, they suddenly heard a series of heavy objects falling to the ground. Then, a large amount of yellow sand surged out, covering the people at the front with dust all over their faces. "Faster, they are releasing the sand ballast, and the floating airship will be able to take off soon." Because he had sent spies to investigate before, Commander Wenfeng knew some of the flight procedures of the floating airship. However, just as the Day Watchman was about to lead his men into the terminal building, the meticulous Commander Wenfeng slowed down his pace, pulled his companion, and let the Imperial Guard Legion General lead his men in first. Rumble, in less than a moment, as soon as the Imperial Guard Legion General led his personal guards into the terminal building, the gunpowder buried inside exploded, and the ground trembled. Not only did the entire terminal building collapse, but even the apron behind it and the nearby city walls of Byte were damaged to varying degrees. And just as the people who luckily escaped with their lives were secretly rejoicing, suddenly, someone shouted through the dispersing sand and dust. The huge black shadow that was rapidly rising into the air, the floating airship has taken off. Commander Wenfeng frowned. He knew that this flying vehicle could climb to an extremely high altitude, and if it was bent on retreating, it would be useless even if he mobilized the flying carpet to pursue it. "Let's go," since there was no way out, he immediately suggested to the day watchman. "We have to quickly meet up with the Grand Vader. If we lose the Imperial Guard soldiers here, the matter of asking for ransom will be much more complicated." Chapter 332. Keyes, who still didn't know what the Great Dimensional was planning, was like a rider who had failed at a certain point, motionless. Move, he could still move a little. After an entire night, when the carriage carrying the amber crystal drove into the Lagoon Museum, the young blue dragon regained consciousness. Thanks to his ability to actively adapt, he had not only successfully derived another set of circulatory systems to fully adapt to the oxygen-free environment, but he had also grown an organ similar to a poison sac, slowly concentrating the toxins in his body in one place. In other words, he had recovered more than half of his strength, and he now had the ability to fight the Great Dimensional. However, as a price, he had used up a lot of the divine power he had collected from the island world, and there was no place to replenish it for the time being. Megalosaurus were never salted fish, at least not for a dragon with the potential of a mutant like Keyes. The reason he hadn't broken the amber crystal's shackles on him was mainly because he was curious as to why the Great Dimensional and Kunini had joined forces to deal with him, and what their F***king purpose was. And this amber-shaped crystal was really quite sturdy, and it also greatly weakened his psychic powers and force field abilities. The young man really had no way to break free for a while with his physical strength alone. Since he was already here, he might as well take things as they came. He didn't believe that the Great Dimensional had captured him just to add a piece of Megalosaurus amber to his home as a decoration. And to deal with him, whether he wanted to slice him up for research or kill him to prevent future trouble, he needed to take apart this amber crystal. Before he lost consciousness, Keyes noticed that when his companions tried to rescue him, all their spells and physical attacks had no effect on the amber crystal, so he didn't think that the Great Dimensional could do anything to him through this crystal. Of course, this was just speculation, but fortunately, he had the Spirit Crystal Servant that stored deep origin power as a trump card, so Keyes wasn't really at his wit's end. So, after his 350th attempt to break the amber crystal to no avail, the young blue dragon decisively chose to give up for the time being. He began to size up the underground laboratory where he was locked up. Although it was called an underground laboratory, it could be seen as a small underground city that occupied a huge area. Keyes had a hard time imagining what the Grand Vader's purpose was to spend so much manpower and material resources under the lagoon. Due to geological reasons, the laboratory had to be protected by magic circles at all times to ensure that it would not leak or collapse. At the same time, a pyramid-shaped building was built near the crystal amber where the young blue dragon was imprisoned. The area it occupied was comparable to Pharaoh's palace. After observing for a while, Quest was surprised to find that the pyramid was completely made of gold, judging from the reflection of the torchlight on the surface. Perhaps due to its weight, there were some broken particles at the corners of the pyramid. With the keen eyesight of the Megalosaurus, Keyes could see that the broken parts of the particles were also shining with a golden color. No wonder gold is so scarce in the Ashen world. The young blue dragon secretly clicked his tongue, but he still did not connect the attack on him with gold. It turns out that almost all the gold in this world has been collected here by the Grand Vader. Keyes silently thought about how to escape. Time flew by, and about 3 or 4 hourglasses had passed. He estimated that it was now dawn in Medicus, but he did not know if the ambush on him by the Grand Vader would cause a controversy in the court. Pharaoh seems to be wary of the Grand Vader, so he supports the Obsidian Council. The president of the Obsidian Council is the demon Count Kunini, but he has joined forces with the Grand Vader this time. But if Kunini was instructed by Pharaoh, there was no Pharaoh's force among the people who ambushed me. Using the method of elimination, Quest tried to sort out the situation one by one. In the end, his gaze fell on the pyramid made entirely of gold. Could it be that the strongest in Medicus still wants to expand his collection? But why would Kunini join forces with him? He should have also received Bateau's military order. Because he wasn't clear about the Devil Count's desire to break free from the shackles of his noble title, the young blue dragon couldn't make sense of it no matter how much he thought about it. He was especially puzzled by the alliance between the Grand Vader and Kunini. Just as he was deep in thought, a commotion suddenly broke out. "Your Excellency the Grand Vader, according to what you said, that young blue dragon has no chance of survival at this moment." Beside the Grand Vader, Kunini, the temporary ally, was constantly criticizing the other party, the main purpose of which was to ensure that Keyes' body and soul were destroyed. And the Grand Vader, who led him into the laboratory, seemed to not care about the Demon Count's clamor at all. He quietly walked towards the amber crystal that imprisoned Keyes. "This is..." Approaching, Kunini first saw the imprisoned young blue dragon, but soon his attention was attracted by the golden pyramid in the distance. "Could it be that this is all the disaster coins you have collected in the Ash world for 100 years? "Almost all," the Grand Vader answered the Demon Count, which was rare for him. He explained, "This is the majority of the gold in the Ash world, but this world is actually a world lacking gold, so for my experiment the total amount is still slightly lacking." "How much is still lacking, or how much gold do you still want?" Kunini asked bluntly. He had already guessed why the Grand Vader wanted to imprison Keyes and not kill him directly. This was obviously a deal, or using the young blue dragon as a bargaining chip to ask for a ransom from the Chamber of Commerce under his command. Normally, the Demon Count would not say that he wanted a share of the pie, but at least he would come up with some bad ideas, so that the Grand Vader would use some more radical means to snatch the gold. But now he was under Battle's military order, and if Keyes did not rush to the front line as scheduled, with the usual habits of Battle's bureaucracy, he, as the helper, would definitely be under strict investigation, and there would be no guarantee that there would be no mistakes. Therefore, Kunini asked the Grand Vader. This Demon Count wanted to pay some gold to buy the right to immediately execute Keyes. Hearing the Demon Count's question, the Grand Vader was slightly startled at first, but then he smiled and replied, "Of course, the more the better, but..." His finger pointed at Kunini. "You, as a demon, do not have the ability to pay." From the top of the golden pyramid, a straight beam of light shot out and instantly pierced through Kunini. Just like when facing Snyder's sneak attack last night, the Grand Vader used a powerful spell he had created, but this time he became the attacker, and the hexagonal crystal column was replaced by the golden pyramid, which had more energy storage. Under the cleansing of the vast light, the Demon Count, who was affected by the confusion spell, which was also why he trusted the Grand Vader and came to his laboratory, instantly collapsed and evaporated. The dead do not have the ability to pay. Chapter 333. As his body was burned to ashes, Kunini's ambitions crumbled. Because he wanted to become the Count of the Nessus court and thus break away from the promotion sequence of ordinary devil counts, he spent all his savings and transferred his soul from the Bartholomew Hell to the Ashen World in a remote area of the multiverse. Kunini had wanted to obtain the gift of Hell, by dragging this plane into the Bader camp. At the same time, he had estimated that this backward world did not have an existence that could easily kill him. But he had never thought that the Grand Vexer of the Medici Empire had hidden himself so deeply that he had a way to kill him instantly. In an instant, the Bader Group devil with lofty ambitions had been defeated, and his soul had been destroyed before he could succeed. "Don't try to make a deal with the devil," the Grand Vexer said faintly after taking care of the aftermath. "Unless you can kill him in the end." Then, he looked back at Keyes, who was imprisoned in the amber crystal, and teleported away from the underground laboratory. In Bite City, after last night's riot, the atmosphere today was particularly solemn. Although the sun was high in the sky, there were not many pedestrians on the streets of the city, and every street was patrolled by soldiers. As for the merchants from other cities, the soldiers of the Praetorian army personally visited them to repeatedly check and interrogate them. Even the slightest resistance would result in a round of punches and kicks, and the more serious ones might even be attacked with axes. After experiencing the demon disaster 2 days ago, all the citizens were a little paranoid. People who were familiar with each other asked each other. They all wanted to know what had happened in the riot that broke out last night. Some said that Megalosaurus Pasha had betrayed Medici due to the temptation of the demon. Some said that the demon remnants might have ambushed Keyes and blown up the terminal in order to avenge their master. There were all kinds of theories. But the only thing that was certain was that the merchants who had dealings with Gnome City in the south were the focus of attention. Among them, many were taken away by the Praetorian army overnight. No one knew whether they were interrogated or interrogated. In the entire Bite City, the only place that could be considered normal was the newly repaired trade port that was about to be put into use. The air there was filled with the smell of sea salt, fertilizer, and boiling asphalt. It was filled with the cries of seagulls and the endless shouts of the people working at the port. The masts of the ships they loaded and unloaded swayed gently in the breeze. After the demon disaster, Keyes had used the purification pump he invented to purge the flesh and blood poison of the demon lord in the fjord. Soon after, this important port regained its former bustle, even more so than before. After hearing the news from last night, Zagan Pasha rushed to the port under the escort of his personal guards as soon as the curfew was lifted. Using his identity as a pasha and his personal guards, who looked like they were not to be trifled with, he easily avoided a lot of trouble. Men with baskets full of freshly picked apples and fowls hanging round their necks, peddlers with baskets piled up on the quayside and calling out to the sailors as they passed, women with armfuls of cloth in their hands and trying to convince the sailors of the value of their goods, and children with tinder they had procured from whence they came, and at the same time coveted the sailors' purses. More importantly, he did not need to be subjected to the suddenly strict inspection of the port guards. After passing through a passage specially prepared for high-ranking officials and dignitaries, Zagan Pasha soon arrived at the anchorage and saw his ship with half of its sails raised. Jackdaw was the name of Zagan Pasha's ship. It originated from a legend that had been circulating among the sailors of the archipelago for a long time. It was said that in ancient times, there was a legendary warship that could fly into the sky and go into the sea. Its name was Jackdaw. At this moment, Zagan Pasha really hoped that his ship could live up to its name. It was unrealistic to fly into the sky, but at least it could travel faster on the sea and send him back to the archipelago sooner. The reason he had such a wish was because of the ambush on the Megalosaurus Pasha yesterday. As a pasha, he definitely knew more about the inside story than the ordinary citizens. From the moment he learned that the great Wechtel had made a move on Keyes, he had many guesses, each of which made him feel terrified. What was even more intriguing was that before the ambush, the great Wechtel had solemnly vowed to have a good relationship with Sir Keyes. It was said that when the Megalosaurus Pasha counterattacked, his poison suddenly flared up and he was easily captured by the great Wechtel. Zagan knew very well that the braised codfish he took out at the banquet was actually specially provided by Commander Wenfeng of the Great Wechtel. According to him, it was to show his sincerity to Keys. There must be something wrong with that braised codfish. While he was glad that he did not eat it, he was puzzled. But the Megalosaurus Pasha didn't eat the braised codfish. Instead, it was his ogre companions who ate it clean? After thinking for a long time, Zagan could not figure out the main point. He simply gave up thinking and quickened his pace towards his ship. Bite City has become a place of trouble. I should go back to the archipelago as soon as possible. The moment he set foot on the deck, his hanging heart relaxed a little. Zagan was truly afraid that the great Vader would kill him to silence him, so as to keep the secret of his poisoning forever. Therefore, the Pasha stayed by the starboard wheel until the Jackdaw had sailed out of the anchorage. Slowly, the sails were raised, and the ship rushed out of the mouth of the fjord at full speed. Just as he was feeling lucky for his quick reaction, he remembered that he had not eaten breakfast yet. He wanted to ask the Jackdaw's chef to prepare some food for him. Remember, I only want cheese and water. It was not that he had lost his appetite for delicious food. It was just that he did not feel safe putting food into his mouth. With the Megalosaurus Pasha as an example, Zagan did not think that his ability to resist poison was better than a Megalosaurus. After the sail was filled with the sea breeze, Zagan carefully checked the ship's operation. After finding nothing unusual, he turned around and went to the cabin at the stern. He wanted to eat there first, then take a short nap. When he walked into the cabin, a plate of cheese with blue stripes was placed on the dining table. There was also a pot of water beside it. Zagan yawned. Just as he was about to take the food, he suddenly thought of something. He pointed at the guard on duty and said, "Try the cheese first." The guard obeyed. Zagan waited for a while, and when he saw that the guard was not acting strangely, he felt relieved and began to eat. As he ate the cheese, he felt a little thirsty. He picked up the pot and poured some water into his mouth. After that, the Pasha did not wake up again. At the same time, the Jackdaw's sails had been retracted. The Pasha's ship had returned to Bites Harbor. Standing next to a stall at the harbor, Commander Wenfeng was haggling with a hawker when he saw the Jackdaw's return. The second part of the ambush on Keys last night had been taken care of. Now, he had to finish the last part. Touching the papyrus letter in his pocket, he could not help but sigh. 3,330,000 silver cars, or the equivalent in gold. I hope I can come back safe and sound. Chapter 334. The Nero River was the largest river in Medica. It had plenty of water and a wide surface. Therefore, even if the boat went against the current, the sailors would not find it too difficult to paddle. Before Quessa's scales of Eternity Chamber of Commerce used the Leviathan Behemoth's derivative as a carrier to establish an air route between the north and south of the empire, this river was the most commonly used highway by merchants and travelers. Sailing on the river, there was no need to take a long detour due to the mountains in the way, and there was no need to worry about the danger of getting lost. Moreover, there were many cities and villages along the Nero River, so it was easy to get supplies. They set off from Bite City and traveled by land to the city at the mouth of the Nero River. Then, they boarded a specially prepared galleon with enough food and water. More than 30 strong men sat on the lower deck and took turns to row the oars, heading straight for Nome City. Due to the ample preparation, the journey, which originally took more than a month, was shortened to about 10 days. However, Commander Wenfeng still felt that it was too long. As the saying went, if things were delayed, things would change. The scale of perpetual order had given too much time to react. Who knew if the other party had come up with a way to deal with it, or if the Megalosaurus Pasha's hostage would expire and become invalid? There are too many variables on this trip. Standing on the bow deck, Commander Wenfeng looked at the approaching city and thought to himself, But the Grand Vader's conditions are a little too harsh. If I had known this would happen, I would have let my men take full responsibility for the pursuit of the jackdaw. Originally, after dealing with Zagan Pasha, he wanted to use a teleportation spell to reach Gnome City directly and go to the headquarters of the Scale of Perpetual Order to hand over the ransom agreement with the Grand Vader. But to his surprise, when the portal was opened, the sorcerers, who were at least at the level of Blackrobe, found that the spatial coordinates of Gnome City were greatly disturbed, and they could not teleport at all. Needless to say, it must be a defensive measure to prevent a surprise attack on the headquarters after the other party learned that Keys was under attack. That was indeed the case. When Snade had brought everyone back to Gnome, he had immediately activated the defensive lock-like defensive device that he and the young Blue Dragon had developed and deployed together, guarding against the Grand Vader's teleportation ambush. At the same time, the Pasha territory originally controlled by Keys had also entered a state of full combat readiness. They were always on guard against the Medici army that could appear at any time, regardless of whether the other party obeyed Pharaoh or the Grand Vader. Of course, Pharaoh was the highest ruler of this land. Within the Pasha's territory, there were some towns and cities that were further away from Gnome and the Dragon Nest. They did not strictly follow the administrative and military orders issued by Gnome City. However, the nearby cities, such as Sparut on the Nero River, where Commander Wenfeng was about to arrive, had already entered a state of military control. Everyone was on edge. Commander Wenfeng was very sure of this, especially when he saw the ballista on the dock aiming at his ship. He no longer had any doubts about the information that his men had gathered. "Be careful, but don't show your weapons," he ordered loudly, making sure that all the sailors on the galleon could hear him. "After all, we are only here to negotiate, not to start a war." If the sailors on this ship were ordinary sailors, his order would have been almost impossible, because no sailor would be willing to obediently put down their weapons when someone aimed a ballista at them. However, those who served on this ship were all carefully selected people who had heard the news. Naturally, they would not question the orders of their own commander. Even if the other party ordered them to commit suicide immediately, they would gladly do so without any hesitation. Listen to the defenders on the shore. Our galleon needs to dock and head to Gnome City near Sparut. His Excellency the Grand Vexual has an important letter that needs to be delivered to the Consul of Gnome City. For the safety of the Megalosaurus Pasha and yourselves, do not rashly open fire. Otherwise, the next wave of ships sailing towards Sparut will not be the small boats of diplomats, but the thousands of warships of the Medici army. The one who shouted was the leader of the sailors. He was also one of the men who had heard the news. Although there were spellcasters on Wenfeng's side, and they could use voice transmission spells, they were now in a state of mutual hostility. In order to prevent the other party from misunderstanding and causing more trouble or even attacks, they could only use this more primitive method to communicate. Communication was basically done by shouting, but it was good. Of course, it was also possible that the message was very useful to the defenders on the shore. In any case, the ballista that looked like it would only take one shot to destroy the entire galleon did not fire. The defenders on the shore sent out a special navigator to guide the galleon to a special berth at the dock. From the information gathered by the men who had heard the news, Sparut was nominally under the jurisdiction of the consul, but in reality, it was controlled by the leader of an underground organization called Glove. And this Glove was a spy that the Megalosaurus Pasha had placed in the city. As the leader of Medici's spies, Commander Wenfeng was actually looking forward to meeting this Glove. He wanted to test the bottom line of this person's loyalty. Even if he could not use this person for himself, he could at least add a nail to Keys's seemingly monolithic camp so that it would be easier to break them down one by one in the future. But Glove did not give him this opportunity. Commander Wenfeng and his men did not even enter Sparut. Instead, 2 teams of defenders brought some camel beasts and escorted them directly to Gnome City under the guise of guards. Sparut was only about a day's journey from Gnome City. Since it was related to the safety of the Megalosaurus Pasha, the team had to maintain a fast pace. In addition, the scale of perpetual order had paid for the roads to be repaired for the convenience of transportation. After walking for about 10 hourglasses, Commander Wenfeng saw the walls of Gnome City. During the Japanese invasion, the city had been burned down. Because it was used to make obsidian magic orbs to support the portal, less than 1/10 of the people in the city had survived. But now, in less than a year after Keyes' management, the city had regained its vitality after the tournament. More and more people from the surrounding area had come to settle down here. After entering the city gate, Commander Wenfeng saw many merchants coming and going, as well as a bustling commercial market that was comparable to Byte. I hope this city, or the scale of perpetual order, can get 33 million silver cats. Otherwise, if such a thriving city of Medici is destroyed again, I'll have to commit many more sins. Chapter 335. After using an escape spell to escape from Byte City, Snade used a directional teleportation spell to bring the young blue dragon and his companions back to Gnome City. The scale of perpetual order also carried out a strategic retreat. After being ambushed, everyone was more or less injured. Only the ogre gourmet Brew fell ill because of the poison. In order to detoxify and heal him, the witch doctor Paru had put in a lot of effort, but there was no improvement. He even had to concoct some highly toxic drugs in an attempt to fight poison with poison. If not for Brew's poison resistance, Paru's drugs would have been able to kill an ordinary ogre. It was not until the Demolic created a new steampunk-style body for himself that Brew's injuries stopped worsening with the help of the legendary spellcaster and the new anti-poison drugs developed by Paru that Brew's injuries were no longer worsening. However, his life was still in danger. Seeing his brother enduring the pain, his healthy brown skin gradually turned into an ominous grayish-green. Some parts of his body had begun to shrink, and his weight had decreased by more than 1/3. Paru finally made up his mind. He would use his and Brew's lives as a wager to try a special treatment method. Blue and I might be in danger. The ogre shaman stood in front of Blue's sickbed and tiptoed slightly to pat Blue's shoulder. Facing his brother who was almost half his height, the shaman instructed earnestly, "If, and I'm saying if, both of us don't wake up, you mustn't recklessly seek revenge on the great Vader. Come with us. I believe that given enough time, you'll definitely grow into the strongest ogre. There's no one like you." Tears streamed down from the eyes of the ogre Neru. Although he wanted to stop Paru from taking the risk, this was the only way to save Brew. He could only give it a try. "Please, Master Snade." After instructing his brother, the ogre voodoo doctor looked at the steampunk half-lich who had been collaborating with him for a long time. "Later, please help us set up a barrier. This voodoo spell. There won't be any interference." The exhaust pipe on Snade's body spewed out steam, making a whistling sound. He interrupted Paru's words. "Within half an hourglass, I promise with the real name of the spellcaster that you'll be able to do it." Originally, Snade wanted to say that if the voodoo spell failed, he would use a necromancy spell to resurrect Brew and Brew in another form. However, considering that it was not appropriate to disturb Brew's state of mind before casting the spell, he swallowed his words halfway. It was true that Snader, who was born in the Drow race, did not understand what friendliness and compassion were. However, as a research scholar, he deeply understood the principle of learning alone without friends, and learning alone without friends, which meant that Snader was ignorant and ignorant. Through the cooperation with Paru, the proud and arrogant half-lich recognized this ogre voodoo doctor. With his knowledge and ability in the field of voodoo and biological modification, Snade thought that Paru was a rare academic exchange partner. "Then, thank you very much. With a buzzing sound, a light blue barrier appeared in Bru's ward, enveloping Bru and his Dr. Paru. After isolating themselves from any external disturbances, Paru looked at his brother who was lying on the bed. "Next time when you eat," he said as he raised the troll's skull staff in his hand, "don't put anything into your mouth." As he said this, he took out a ceremonial bone dagger from the troll's skull staff and stabbed it into Bru's heart. Bru was poisoned, and his smelly blood spurted out like spring water. However, at this moment, it seemed to be grasped by a pair of invisible hands and condensed into a huge blood ball that hovered at the tip of the dagger and rotated. Seeing this, Paru did not hesitate. He quickly changed the direction of the dagger and cut open the artery on his thigh, allowing his blood to mix with Bru's poison blood. Voodoo secret spell, poison transfer. The ogre witch doctor endured the feeling of powerlessness caused by the massive blood loss and decisively cast a secret spell to transfer all the poison in Bru's body into his own body. During the process of casting the spell, he carefully controlled the location of the poison, avoiding many important organs, and blocked the poison in his feet, the extremities of his limbs that were the furthest away from his organs and brain. As the poison was transferred out, the grayish-green color on Bru's skin faded at a visible speed. However, the wound caused by the ceremonial dagger in his heart was still fatal, and he was still on the verge of death. Under the influence of the poison, the ogre witch doctor's feet quickly festered, and grayish-green spots instantly spread to his calves. Paru made a prompt decision and used the last of his strength to break the troll's skull staff into two halves. Voodoo secret spell. Troll's gift. The troll's skull staff was made from Paru's spine and skull. Through a unique secret spell, the unique vitality of the troll race was preserved. At the most critical moment, Paru would have a chance to heal his body. At this moment, he passed this gift to the dying Bru. Light brown mucus flowed out from the broken part of the staff. Paru poured all of it into Bru's chest that had been pierced by the ceremonial bone dagger and covered the surface of his damaged heart. This troll's gift allowed Bru's wounds to heal rapidly. Just like a real troll, other than using acid and fire to completely kill them, even if they were chopped into pieces, the pieces could grow into new troll children. Seeing Bru's chest start to beat again, Paru's heart was half at ease. He felt a little dizzy, but the healing process did not stop. The ogre witch doctor licked the brown liquid on the broken part of the staff and held it in his mouth. Then, without any hesitation, he picked up the sharp dagger and slashed at his own knee. Paru lay in a pool of blood. He used a legendary voodoo staff and his own legs as the price to save Bru's life. Seeing that the secret spell was completed, the half-lich Snade, who was waiting at the side, quickly removed the protective barrier and used magic to stop Paru's bleeding. The ogre Nalu rushed to his brother's side. He glanced at Blue to make sure that his chest was beating vigorously. He then carried Blue's body and placed him on another bed that had been prepared beforehand. "Things that can't kill us." Neru straightened his body. Although the room had been raised, the ogre's head was still close to the ceiling. "After eating them, we'll become stronger." Eat, perhaps because he heard the familiar words, the ogre gourmet, who had been unconscious for a few days, murmured softly and repeated Neru's words. Chapter 336. As the head of the spies, Commander Wenfeng's heart was as firm as a rock. When facing people who had few secrets because of their wounds, he could ignore the other party's cries and quietly wait for the result he wanted. But to destroy a city, and a city that belonged to the country he had sworn to protect, and to send the entire city's citizens to the gallows, was not something that was easy to convince himself to do. It required a considerable degree of viciousness. Even if the Grand Vexer used the words "unknown noble cause" to describe the mission they were carrying out, and repeatedly assured him that as long as he obtained the last batch of gold, his spellcasting preparations would be completed. By then, the curse of the Medici Empire and even the Ashen World would be lifted, and their people would obtain inexhaustible energy, and the land would burst forth with more vitality. However, Commander Wenfeng had always been skeptical of this, but out of loyalty to the Grand Vexer, he carried out the order. In the future, if anyone mentions noble cause to me, I will definitely tell them to stay as far away as possible. Riding on the back of a hunchback, Commander Wenfeng entered the inner city of Nome. He did not even need to use his eyes to observe. The unfriendly gazes cast at him made him feel like there were thorns in his back. Especially those unknown ones. Approaching the garden square in the center of the city, he saw the strategic teleportation portal built by the Wusan, as well as the ruins of the city's governor's mansion. After all of them were razed, Nome's new public facilities were rebuilt. As he went deeper into the city, Commander Wenfeng found more and more novel things that had not appeared even in Beitar. For example, many of the streets here had railway tracks in the air. From time to time, there would be cars that were emitting thick smoke and making whining noises as they pulled goods or pedestrians quickly across the street. Another example was that he saw many small pavilions on the streets, and pedestrians would use 1 or 2 copper coins to buy printed papyrus to read. He ordered someone to buy a copy and found that it was similar to Beitar's official newspaper, but the content was richer. Business information, local customs and customs of Medicus. There was even a brief report about the attack on Megalosaurus Pasha. No wonder. He looked at the papyrus printed with the trademark of the Scales of Eternity in his hand. The text on it was full of speculation about the motives of the Grand Vader, Commander Wenfeng, and the others. Since entering this city, I have received so much hostility. He understood this kind of advertising method, but after some careful consideration, Wenfeng immediately realized another problem. That's not right. The bulletin here will be sold to the normal citizens. The literacy rate of the citizens here has reached a very high level. Thinking of this, he could not help but suck in a breath of cold air. The increase in the literacy rate not only meant that the cultural quality of the city's citizens had improved, but it also meant that the ordinary people here had gradually broken away from the category of ignorance and were beginning to be able to use knowledge to arm their minds. Learning knowledge was once a privilege of the aristocracy, even in Bite City, which was the richest city in Medici. As a spy chief, he was well aware of the power of knowledge. At the same time, he was also well aware of the collateral value of knowledge, the ability to think rationally, which spread and infected like a plague. A single spark could start a prairie fire. Since the people of Nome City had developed wisdom, then what about the other cities adjacent to Nome City? What about the cities that had close trade with Nome City? What about the foreign tribes that were gradually approaching the dragon's territory? As far as he knew, it had been more than 10 days since the Megalosaurus Pasha was captured by the Grand Vader, but none of the cities that had established commercial trade routes with the Scale of Eternity Order had taken the initiative to terminate their cooperation. The value of Nome City, or even the values of Nome City, had now been widely recognized. Even if those cities were still under the rule of the Pasha and the Archons, the foundation of their rule, the aristocratic system of Medici, had been shaken by Nome. As for the regional and emerging business aristocrats, it could be seen from the fact that they did not take the initiative to terminate their cooperation with the Scale of Eternity Order that they were very dependent on Nome. Ransom, they must pay enough wealth, Commander Wenfeng secretly calculated in his heart. According to the information he had obtained, although the daily operations of the Scale of Eternity Order would not be personally participated by the Megalosaurus Pasha, its integrated resources and power could be completely borrowed from the power of Keys, the Megalosaurus. The young blue dragon was the core that united the Scale of Eternity Order. They could not give up on such a leader. Commander Wenfeng sorted out his thoughts and found that the burden on his shoulders had suddenly become heavier. Even if we need to start a small-scale war, we will not hesitate to do it for the ransom. Only in this way can we reduce the speed of development of the scale of eternity. Let the Grand Vader's experiment be completed first, and prevent the Medici Empire from being divided into different classes and causing even more destructive turmoil. He waved his hand. It was not a spell, but a signal with the hand gesture that they had agreed on before. The eyes of the two elite sniffers beside him lit up, and they immediately threw out two chimera-modified, telepathic palace guards without leaving a trace. As soon as they landed, they hid in the shadows of the street corner. According to the instincts of living creatures, these telepathic palace guards that had different voice messages recorded in advance would follow the pheromones, and these pheromones were smeared in the corners of the streets and alleys by the sniffers who had infiltrated Gnome City earlier. The telepathic palace guards relied on their small bodies to follow the route planned by the pheromones without attracting attention, and finally arrived at a preset safe house in the city. After the sniffers waiting there received the message, they would immediately think of a way to encrypt the message and send it out of Gnome City. But the two elite sniffers who threw the telepathic palace guards did not expect that their little pets had not gone far. To be precise, they had just turned a corner in the street when they encountered a separated skeleton puppet. Although the separated skeleton puppet was only the size of a mouse, it was enough to deal with the telepathic palace guards. Under the orders of the kobold leader of the Dragonborn clan, who led them to set up a defensive circle, the telepathic palace guards were quickly captured alive. Then they were immediately taken away and sent to the steampunk Demolika's laboratory, where Snyder personally analyzed the voice message. The production cost of the telepathic palace guards is 25 silver cats each, and the breeding cost is 15 silver cats. Please make the corresponding compensation. Hearing this message, steam spewed out from the exhaust pipe behind Snyder, and two whistles sounded. At this time, a patrolling eagle with a note tied to its claw in advance was flying quickly to the north, and there were two other patrolling eagles still circling above Gnome City, waiting for Commander Wenfeng's new orders. Chapter 337. A team of bandits was walking in the vast desert. Many bandits had scarves or handkerchiefs loosely tied around their neck. They had tattoos on their bodies that symbolized their affiliation with the bandit. They also had beards, and their heads were wrapped in white cloth headscarves used to block the burning of the eternal blaze. Some of the sailors looked old, but they were actually not that old. They were at most in their 20s or 30s. Their skin was dark brown and their faces were full of wrinkles. They had been baptized by wind and sand. The skin of the real old bandits was like a melted candle. Most of the older sailors were silent. The scarves around their necks were always pulled up to cover their mouths and noses. Their headscarves were so low that they almost covered their eyes. They were alert. Most of the bandits carried more than one weapon: machetes, daggers, bows and arrows, crossbows. In the unique culture of the bandit circle, the more weapons they had, the more powerful they were. Most of those weapons were obtained from battles, and such battles included but were not limited to robbing small desert elf tribes, attacking caravans, and fighting between bandit gangs. These people's hometowns were all over the place: Gnome City, Sparut City, Rust City, Bite City, Taka City. Some of them were even the remnants of the Japanese expeditionary army that had been scattered before. And the one leading them was an elite team of sniffers. About a year ago, this group of bandits was like a mass of loose sand, scattered in the vast central and southern areas of Medica. They relied on the trade routes between oases, the weapons in their hands, and their true abilities to do a happy business without any cost. However, since Megalosaurus Pasha ruled the central territories of Medica, the scale of perpetual order rose rapidly. These bandits, who were originally going to make a fortune from the development of trade, were in big trouble. How could the young Blue Dragon let go of those who affected the development of the Chamber of Commerce? That was an important carrier for him to gradually grow his power. As a result, These bandits who used to roam the desert became the main targets of the Megalosaurus Pasha from the moment he took office. Apart from the Dragonborn clan, the kobolds would form patrols under the leadership of the young blue dragon in the dragon's lair to regularly encircle and annihilate bandit gangs within their territories. The scale of perpetual order had also set bounties for the heads of many famous bandits. Death, escape, death, injury. In the short span of a year, with Gnome City as the center, there were no longer any large bandit gangs in the surrounding hundreds of paresons. As for the smaller gangs, which usually only had a few dozen or even a few members, they could not attack the cities where the terminal was built and where the forces of the scale of perpetual order had stationed themselves. When they wanted to rob the caravans by land, they had to think twice before robbing them. They had to see if they were a match for the caravan guards so that they could not rob them and their heads would be borrowed, as evidence to exchange for the bounty. Just as these bandits were trembling in fear and anxiety, the sniffer unit began to make arrangements for them in advance. Many of the bandit gangs had spies infiltrated before. After their leaders were hunted down and killed, or died in various accidents, these sniffer unit elites all emerged and became the new leaders of the bandit gangs. They took their subordinates and left the territory of the Megalosaurus Pasha. They carried out small-scale activities in the territories of other Pasha and rested. At the same time, this group of people also secretly formed a bandit alliance. The new leaders of each bandit gang, who were originally the elite members of the sniffer unit, gathered together and used various methods to eliminate dissidents and strengthen their own forces in the local area. Following the orders of the sniffer unit commander, this group of bandits who had been reunited formed an alliance and began to move towards the hinterland of the Megalosaurus Pasha. They wanted to take back the wealth and glory that should have belonged to them. Of course, to put it nicely, these people were pawns. To put it bluntly, they were full of cannon fodder. The purpose of Sniffer Unit Commander's use of this secret chess piece was to bring more pressure to the scale of perpetual order, so as to force them to accept his ransom request. The reason why the Bandit Alliance was the vanguard was that Pharaoh's attitude was still unclear. He had not declared Keyes a traitor, so it was not in line with the rules to send a regular army to his territory. Moreover, according to the information obtained, the Megalosaurus Pasha's ability to create territories was not weak. The cities under its control were tough bones that were difficult to chew. The several legions of the Megalosaurus Pasha had either experienced the invasion of the Japanese or resisted the demon disaster. If they launched another attack on the Blue Dragon's territory, there would definitely be heavy losses. However, it did not matter to the Bandit Alliance. Even if they all died in battle, Sniffer Unit Commander would not feel the slightest bit of heartache. Instead, he would feel fortunate that he did not have to deal with the dregs of the Empire in the future. Of course, in order to not let these cannon fodder die in vain, Sniffer Unit Commander still prepared some new weapons for them. The Bandit Alliance had seized more than 10 cannons and a large amount of ammunition through several robberies. Thanks to the help of these weapons, they were able to pose a certain degree of threat to the cities in the territory of the Megalosaurus Pasha. Bosses! Riding a camel beast from the back of the team to the front of the team, a bandit leader with a light blue headscarf shouted. He was responsible for looking after the supply vehicles, and there were some situations that he had to report to the sniffer who led the team. There's a problem with the wheel hubs of those vehicles again. The barrels of those cannons are still too heavy, and this is the 13th, no, the 14th time that the wheel hubs have broken today. The carpenters said that the places that can be reinforced with rivets have been nailed full. Then what do you think? The sniffer who was disguised as the leader asked indifferently. Boss, we haven't used this thing before. All we have to do is prepare a group of people and shoot a round of fire arrows into the city. Those nobles in the city who are afraid of death will be scared and obediently give us the silver coins. The whip flew through the air and hit the face of the blue headscarf with a paw sound. It was so painful that he trembled, but he still did not dare to cry out. Is the sound of the whip loud? But it is far worse than the sound of cannons. There is no sound louder than the sound of cannons. Especially when the sound is in your ears. With a voice that was close to an aria, the sniffer leader of the Bandit Alliance patiently taught his subordinates. That feeling was like being punched by nothingness. The explosion makes you scared and dizzy. You don't know if the world is really shaking, or if it is just your eyes deceiving you. But it doesn't matter at all, because fear will seize your heart first. Looking at the confused expression of his subordinates, the sniffer shook his head and thought, what's the point of talking to cannon fodder? So he put on a serious face and said sternly, whips and fire arrows can't scare our new target. You definitely didn't make a living in this place before. Old brother, you definitely didn't run out of this place before. Look at the color of your headscarf. Only cannons can work. After being scolded, the bandit leader instantly understood a lot. You're tuning in to the Phoenix Knights YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.